Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 215, Lewis vs. Spivak, also known as UFC Vegas 65. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me back in the co-pilot's chair after his sojourn to New York City is Keith Shillan, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network. Keith, I know you hurried home today to be able to get in this preview.
Yeah.
There's no
had nothing to do with seeing my wife and kids. Had nothing to do with that.
No. It had to do with seeing me. The fans demand a full breakdown of UFC Vegas 65. I mean, we did a full length and then some recap last night. Dev Goes Fishing, Devin Vasquez, fantastic longtime listener and sometime collaborator, stepped in for you, did a real good job. But considering that you were there physically at the Fighter Hotel, at the event, at the post-fight presser, we would be remiss in not giving at least a few minutes to look backward at this past weekend. I mean, what was good? It was a wild card. What was it like in the arena?
Yeah, just the atmosphere was crazy. It was being the longtime fan, and it's actually a question I asked Dana at the press conference, just going from, it was the 29th anniversary of the first UFC, and I'm not going to be one of those people who say I watched the first UFC, but I started UFC 6, so pretty early on. And to think about those days where you could buy a ticket when they were at Mohegan Sun, Jens Pulver versus BJ Penn, and just walk right down to the front row and to be where it is now in Madison Square Garden, in Times Square, the big billboards everywhere, people on the streets wearing shirts and stuff. It was fantastic. And then actually in the arena, Michael Chandler said this, and I think it might have been Poirier who also said it about maybe it might have been Frankie Edgar or somebody about the arena, the way, and obviously I don't know, but the way it sounds, it's so loud at the moments. When Pereira and Adesanya entrances, and I don't know how it was on pay-per-view, but live it gave me chills. They were two of the best entrances. Pereira's with I apologize if I say this wrong, but like the indigenous people that's his, his background, the chanting or whatever that is, it was like goosebumps. And then I don't know what was on the pay-per-view, how it showed, but Adesanya with the Saw theme with the music and the bloody name dripping down and the face changing to his, and like it really felt like a marketing WWE type thing. And it was just or like how boxing does it, where they have a rapper coming down with Floyd Mayweather, stuff like that. It just felt so big. It felt mainstream. Mm-hmm. It felt at that moment that was the most important thing going on in the world. Now, obviously, I know that's not true, but in that moment, it felt like that.
No, that definitely came across on the broadcast. Like their walkouts were chill-inducing. I would say that the co-main walkouts did not go over quite the same. Like Zhang taking 45 minutes to walk to the cage just doesn't hit quite the same, when you're watching it on your screen.
Yeah, I'm glad, because I didn't really know, because I was in the back the whole night. I was in the back. So there was two different areas for press you could be. I was kind of the one looking down, which was it was actually really fantastic view. I actually loved the view because you almost was looking straight over the octagon, which is such a different angle that you'd get, which was really, really cool. I came out to that during the Whaley versus the walkouts, so I only got the very ending of Carlos's. Actually, no, Carlos's father was in the cage. They were doing the introductions when I got to my seats, because they were still doing the backstage interviews and everything. I kind of wish I went out there for Chandler and Poirier, but there was like Dan Hooker was coming out doing interviews and that, so I didn't.
Yeah, like when you're in the media room and they're bringing them through like 20 minutes after their fight ends, and so it's always running into the next fight. It's tough, man. You gotta pick your poison.
Yeah. But I'm glad that I was able to be there for the two big fights.
Awesome. I mean, obviously, there's tons of your video content up on Sherdog right now. You got an exclusive with Olympic wrestling hero David Taylor.
Yeah,
which, cool. I mean, anyone who's a regular of our show knows that like that is something that you that probably made your week, a little bit.
Yeah. So my wife asked me, when I came back, because listen, at the end of the day, I don't get to do this enough. I'm not full time. I only do this part time. I only cover the events that are really in the Northeast because we got other guys. If something's in the South, you're going to go, and West, and guys who are close. It makes sense. I understand that.
Yeah. So
they haven't been to Boston in forever. Maybe I can do something like New York, Philly, something like that. I can kind of do, but so I get to do enough. I have, and I'm actually glad this happened. When it comes to media members, I have a fanboy in me, and I'm glad I haven't lost that. Like, I try to play cool. I'm going to be professional. I'm not going to ask fighters to take pictures with me. I'm not going to do that, but I want to. Like, I still have that in me. Like, I still have the fanboy in me, and I'm still excited when I run into people and talk to people. And I'm glad that hasn't happened like other guys, like we went to the media day and everybody was complaining. There was 22 fighters at the media. I'm like they were complaining too much. I'm like, man, there's 14 fights on this card. Let's get the other guys who, why don't we just do everybody? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I'm doing the opposite. Like, I'm we don't get everybody.
And I'm not calling anybody in particular out when I say this, because I think at the very least the kind of core of people that cover UFC events live are extremely professional and very diligent about their jobs. But it's possible, I think, to get jaded if you're one of the just serious road dogs who's like travels with the circus 40 weeks a year.
Get John Morgan. I get it.
Yeah, and like
it is draining. Like, as much as it is, I was absolutely drained.
Yeah, like
coming back today. But so what I was going to say was, it was kind of like 3 highlights, and I'm glad you said this. So just being there as a highlight, but I really pointed out that the walkouts were running into David Taylor. Not that it was like meeting like a celebrity or something like that, but it was more not expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was saying to Nolan King of MMA Junkie, I said, I was super excited to run into David Taylor because I wasn't expecting him at an MMA event. But if it'd be the opposite, if I was at a NCAA wrestling championship and Israel Adesanya was there, then I'd be excited to see him because I wasn't expecting it,
Mm-hmm.
And then the coolest thing, and this has always been number one for me, is I ran into a bunch of listeners of our show, and that was cool. I want to give a shout outs to them. Unfortunately, I actually forgot to ask last names of some of them, so I apologize, but they'll know who they are. I gotta find where I wrote this down. One was Nate and Kevin. They're a father and son. I met them in the lobby, actually right before I interviewed David Taylor. They're from New Jersey. They both watch our show, so that was really cool. They came up to me, which was cool. While I was walking to the arena, there was an entrance for media, but there was like, gate A is a huge line of people. Gate B is a huge line of people.
Yeah.
And I think I was walking by and I heard someone scream out, "Shillan Duffy show." And I turned to my left. I thought I was waving. and I said, I waved back. And then, the guy came over and I started talking. His name was Luis. He's from Brooklyn. So he watches our stuff. I tell these guys, none of these guys comment. I said, you guys got to jump on the recap. And the last one, which was really cool, Tom Cleary, he's from Connecticut. He's actually worked for heavy.com. He's a media member.
Oh, okay.
And I actually went up to him and just started talking to the guy, and I introduced myself. He goes, "Oh, I know you are. I watch the show and stuff." And then there was a guy, I apologize, a British guy early in the week. I didn't write his name down. But he went up to me on the bus to the press conference, and he said, "Hey, I watch your stuff for my preparation and stuff." So that was really
okay. So he's a media guy.
He's a media guy too.
Oh, okay. It was like Oscar Willis. No.
No.
Yeah, I'm used to, kind of where, you're in the media line and like one of the gates is right next to you. I'm just used to people running over and asking the schmo to put his glasses on for a photo with him.
Yeah.
And, Dave's
hold the phone so we take a picture with John Morgan. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually did that for my son Adam because to basically make fun of him, because I sent him some pictures from Press Row a couple events ago, like maybe back in May. He's like, "Whoa, is that John Morgan?" I'm like, "Dude, yes. Here, fine. I'll go take a picture with John Morgan for you."
Everybody loves John Morgan. Everybody loves John Morgan.
Yep. Hey, he's a lovable guy. Yeah.
He's the man.
Yeah. All right. Well, tell you what. if I don't like switch lanes, we're gonna talk for an hour about UFC 281.
Yeah,
be like, recap. So I'll have to tell Fridley on Tuesday. So we don't have a preview, but we do have 2 recaps. How's that sound?
His R is doing a 30-second prediction. Here you go.
Yeah. UFC Fight Night 215. UFC's back at the Apex. We talk about it multiple times a year, especially after one of the massive pay-per-views, you know, the Madison Square Garden event, the Midsummer event, any of these ones that have multiple title fights on them. There's always that, you know, breakfast the day after Thanksgiving. It's like, I know I got to eat something, but I don't feel hungry. And what I got isn't as cool as what I had yesterday. By those standards, I mean, I'm going to venture an opinion here. There are some action fights on this card for sure. I mean, Andre Fialho and Muslim Salikov is probably going to like feature some crazy stuff. We've got an unranked heavyweight fight on the main card, so it feels good to be back in Fight Night world again. But in terms of divisional relevance, I mean, the co-main between Kennedy Zechikwu and Yohan Kutalaba, they're 2 inconsistent guys, but the guy who wins that fight is probably on the edge of the top 15. Lewis versus Spivak, those are 2 top 10 guys. That's about as good as you can ask for from a fight night these days, is some amount of divisional relevance at the top of the card. But man, this undercard is, I think it's actually even worse than it looks, because it has some name recognition. You're like, oh, I know these names. And then you look a little deeper. Yeah, I know these names, but they're on bad losing streaks. Or I know them because they've been on Dana White's Contender Series 3 times and keep losing. Like, well, because, dude, this is an indicator of kind of the health of the Contender Series and of the UFC. When the Contender Series launched in 2017, 2018, they signed 1 fighter per episode, 1 winner. So they'd have 10 fighters, 1 would get signed. Like, some really good fighters didn't get signed off the Contender Series that season. Like, dude, Chris Curtis, didn't get signed after knocking a dude out in the first round. By the 3rd season, most of the winners were getting signed. By now, winners and some of the losers. Dude, right. This undercard has 5 fighters on it who lost on the Contender Series and ended up getting signed later anyway. Like, it's beyond the point where being a Contender Series veteran matters at all. And, the joke is, of course, that these Fight Night undercards are Dana White's Saturday Night Contender Series, where even after you get signed, you have to, win 3 of the 4 on your Contender Series deal, even to get a regular UFC deal and get promoted to better cards. But this dude, 5 fighters on the undercard, lost on the Contender Series and are still in the UFC. Like, what's the Contender Series even for at that point? That's about all I got to say. There are going to be some fun fights.
What's your grade overall?
C.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. C.
I mean, and the thing is, the main card is a B and the undercard is a D, and it kind of averages out, because the main card, or I mean, let's say the top 6 fights, because I'm not sure whether they're going to open the main card with Della Maddalena versus Roberts or Brundage versus Vieira, but those top 5 or 6 fights are actually pretty good, except for the unranked heavyweight fight.
Yeah, I'll say this. When I looked over the card and why I gave it a C, again, not a lot of divisional relevance. There's no one that you're like, oh, he gets a win, he's going to go on to bigger things, other than maybe Spivak if he gets a win over Lewis in the main event. Yeah. But what I like about the card is it's hard to pick winners. There's maybe 1 or 2 fights where it's really easy to pick the winner. Mm-hmm. Other ones, really a lot of toss-ups, and that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the difference between this, as mediocre as this undercard is, and a Bellator undercard, where it's a bunch of people whose names you don't know, and there's a bunch of minus 800 favorites, or fights where you're not even finding lines on them because it's such a ridiculous matchup. It's not going to be a carnival of slaughter like, one of your Bellator Mohegan cards. Having said that, shall we dig into these?
Yeah, let's do
it. First up, on the UFC Vegas 65 prelims, at least as the card is currently structured, is a flyweight matchup between Natalia Silva and Tereza Bleda. Silva, the 25-year-old Brazilian, is 13-5-1 overall. She is 1-0 in the UFC, made her UFC debut back in June at UFC on ESPN Cater versus Emmett after a 2.5-year absence from the sport. Just came back to relatively little fanfare, came in as an underdog to Jasmine Jasdavicius, and surprised at least some, certainly surprised me by taking a pretty easy decision over her. So she will look to make it 2 in a row and ruin the debut of Bleda, the 20-year-old Czech. Yes, you heard that right. And she just barely turned, or no, sorry, she's going to turn 21 in a couple weeks. Yeah, that's it. She's 20, going to be 21 in a couple weeks. One of the youngest fighters in the UFC. She is a perfect 6-0 in her mixed martial arts career. She won on the Contender Series back in September, taking a unanimous decision over Maia. And here she comes in, looking to keep the undefeated record going. She is not favored to do so. Silva is actually minus 175 as the favorite. Bleda plus 150 on the comeback. I'll jump in here. Now, I'm saying this in full recognition of the fact that I underestimated Natalia Silva in her debut. I thought just, 2.5 years away. She could have improved between then and now, but she's going to be undersized compared to Jasudavicius, and Jasudavicius had really ground out an impressive win over a similarly undersized fighter in Kay Hansen in her last fight. So I figured the safe bet was Jasudavicius, and Silva handled her. Just fought off all the takedowns, marked her up on the feet. I guess I'm underestimating her again because I think Bleda actually has some pretty good upside here. Bleda, I mean, she's 20 years old. You love that. She is a physical specimen. She is a big flyweight, and she is physically a tank. If you look at her record, she's 6-0. She's only been a pro for about 2.5 years, as you would expect of a 20-year-old. And what you don't see here is, in addition to her wins, all of which were at Octagon MMA, the Czech Republic's main promotion prior to being on the Contender Series, she also had an exhibition against former, now once again, UFC flyweight Lucy Pudilova. That's an interesting fight to watch. It's listed as an exhibition in the Sherdog Fight Finder as well as Tapology because it was kind of a weird, like, one-night tournament, custom rules fight. Like, if you watch the fights from Octagon Underground 3, which was back in May of 2020, basically there was no ground time. Anytime someone got a clean takedown, the ref stood him up like 3 seconds later. The good news is she got a lot of takedowns and got stood up a lot of times because she threw Lucy Pudilova all over the place like a ragdoll. And that's back when she was 18 years old. She's a developing striker, I'll say. I mean, she has a boxing background, and you can tell she's tall, she's long-limbed, throws a pretty nice straight jab with some power on it. I don't think she has like real tremendous hand or foot speed, and maybe that's just part of being a big flyweight. But in terms of grappling, she's a powerful wrestler. She actually can shoot from the outside. Her fight on the Contender Series was basically another case of her kind of throwing a smaller woman all over the place. But the thing in that fight was Maia was constantly trying to submit her, and she just spent most of the fight in guard, like shrugging off submission attempts, getting in some ground and pound, and just seemed really comfortable as an overpowering top position grappler. I think that's going to stand her in good stead here against Silva. Now, I guessed incorrectly that Jasudavicius was going to be able to take Silva down. I'm making that guess here again with Bleda. Bleda's even bigger than Jasudavicius. She's younger. She's more athletic. I think she has a better striking game to either set up her takedowns or give her an alternative if they aren't coming in the early part of the fight. But I see this as a bit of a coming out party for Tereza Bleda. Give me Bleda by a pretty dominant, unanimous decision here. And I think we may see a little bit of hype start to crank up. I mean, her nickname is Ronda. Honestly, she looks a little bit like Ronda Rousey. And if she has this if she carries over this sort of physicality where she's just throwing women around with just obvious, like, superior strength, kind of like Ronda Rousey did for most of her career, sky's the limit. So yeah, I am conservatively optimistic about the prospects of 20-year-old Tereza Bleda. Give me Bleda to get it done by decision here.
Yeah, this is a really good fight. I'm glad that you're seeing a lot of things I'm seeing. Like, I think I'm a little higher on Silva than you are. I think she's good. I think she's well rounded. I think she's got great footwork. She works out of both stances, high volume, pretty technically sound striker. She uses feints well, fast hands, accurate. I like that she throws a lot of combinations, beautiful check hook. She does throw a lot of arm punches, which kind of zaps her power a little bit. And she can drop her hands so she throws from her hips, which will actually sometimes be a benefit because you land from different angles, but also it's a defensive liability. I love the dexterity of her hips though. Like she throws kicks so easily. She throws kicks from both stances. I like that she can go high kick for both stances. She does have some defensive holes. She doesn't tuck her chin, which is a little worrisome. But I like that she wrestles herself a little bit. She will. She understands like winning of rounds. She'll catch a kick, get a fight to the ground. I like that she can get in the clinch and get into the upper body lock, get some takedowns there. Good throws. You mentioned it against her last fight against Jasmine Jasudavicius. She, stops some takedowns. Jasmine is also a bigger person. She hit a great whizzer kick reversal on Jasmine, which was really nice. Good ground and pound. She has 7 subs on her record. And she's got good cardio, which I like. Now, Bleda is another one I really like. You mentioned how big, like she's only 20 years. She's a big woman. She's very physically strong. She on the feet, she's a little flat-footed. She's a serviceable boxer though. Basic 1-2, long jab, nice straight right. She's really good at wrapping like punches around her opponent's defense. So she'll like throw one to kind of get the defense up, and then the second one comes around. She makes mistakes to drop her hands, which I don't like. But you said it, and she's a good wrestler, good reactionary double, good top control, good ground and pound. The one thing I don't like is she actually was taken down on the Contender Series against a person that she was kind of dominating, so that's a little troublesome. I love this fight because I really like both fighters. I think both fighters are going to have success in the UFC. I think they're going to be ones who rise up the rankings. But that said, I also hate the matchup because of that. I wish they were both on the card but fighting other people early in their careers. Man, I'm glad that you picked Bleda because I was so on the fence. At first I leaned Bleda, then I said, oh, Silva's a little better on the feet. Can she stop the takedowns? So I was really on the fence. So I'm glad that, like, what am I saying? Like, you taking Bleda makes me feel like I was right about this fight. Like, it's a really close fight. I'm actually going to the opposite. I'm going to go Silva because she's more well-rounded. I think she could win the exchanges on the feet. And she showed enough takedown defense in her last fight that I think she'll be able to take it down. But again, that's a huge if. And if Bleda just ragdolls her with takedowns, like, I'm not going to be surprised because that's kind of how I was leaning first. But I'm going to take Silva in a really close decision.
All right. Well, we are live right out of the gate. A little bit of dissension, though both of us recognize that this is an intriguing and hard to call matchup. Next up at UFC Fight Night 215 and is a matchup between Brady Hiestand and Fernando Garcia. Hiestand, the 23-year-old from Spokane, Washington, 5-2 overall. He is 0-1 in the UFC. His lone UFC appearance was last August in his attempt to become the winner of season 29 of The Ultimate Fighter. He came up short via split decision to Ricky Turcios, who will appear shortly later on this card. Hiestand will look to get back to winning ways against Garcia. The 30-year-old Dallas native, Fortis MMA product, is 10-2 overall. He is 0-1 since joining the UFC out of the 2021 Dana White's Contender Series. His debut was at UFC 274 in May, where he dropped a unanimous decision to Journey Newson. So 2 young bantamweights still looking for their first UFC win. Hiestand is a moderate favorite to get it done. He's minus 155. Garcia plus 135 on the comeback. Keith, you have been flying the flag for a while that men's bantamweight is the best division in the sport right now, that the UFC bantamweight division is the best division in the UFC right now. I've been a little slower to come around, but the thing that always held me back, and that I'm sort of starting to admit that it's now the case, is it now has depth. Because the one thing that lightweight and welterweight had over all the other divisions for a long time was depth. Like, you had to do so much just to even get into the top 15. You had to win so many fights in a row even to break into the top 10 at 170. At this point, 135 is building some serious depth where these are two pretty good fighters, and it's still an open question whether either of them is UFC material just because there are so many good bantamweights in the division right now. Let me know who you think wins this one, and for the winner at least, let me know how much upside you think they actually have.
Yeah. So 135 all the way to 170 is that's about the perfect range where it's so deep. You can make an argument for any one of those divisions because it's so good. I'd say the upside of Hiestand is probably much higher than Garcia. As Garcia's, I think he's already 30, and Hiestand's, I think he's only 22 or 23. Like he's definitely younger. So if one of these guys is going to go on to the sex, I'll take the really younger guy. Now, what we've seen of Hiestand, he's a pressure fighter. He's got some pretty decent pop in his hands. He can get a wild and invite a brawl, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. A lot of kicks. I love his step-in knees. I like that he does wrestle. He's got some fast entries. He's got a good double, like reactionary double if you pressure him. I like that he drives like right through his opponent's hips when they try to like land strikes. This is effective that he can shoot, but sometimes he'll shoot without a setup, which the higher he goes up, he's going to have to fix that. When he's on top, he's got some good top control. It was a while back, but like you saw what he did with Vince Murdoch. He did a really good job of keeping Vince Murdoch on his back. Good ground and pound. One concern I had, and again, this is going back to like the tough show because kind of fairly recent for him, is he gassed out a little bit against Josh Reddinghouse in a fight that he probably should have dominated. Garcia, I say he's a minus athlete. He's a little flat-footed. He is a boxer that marches down his foes, which is surprising that he's a guy that normally fights and presses forward. But his last fight against Johnny Lewis, he probably lost because he refused to let his hands go. It was a closer fight because he didn't let his hands go. Like it was one of these. It was really frustrating when you're watching it. He kept landing the same jab hook combo. He kept looking for the same combo over and over again, which is really different than what I've recently seen him in other fights. He loves winging power shots. His check left hook is probably his best punch. He doesn't check leg kicks, which is troublesome. He got his legs kicked out when he was on the Contender Series. He lacks power too. I think it was on the Contender Series get the only like KO of his career. Excuse me. He isn't a wrestler, but he is a submission threat. He's got 3 subs in his career. Prediction: I like Hiestand in this one. I like his output, especially after what we saw of Garcia in his last fight. I also think he has the ability of the two, more likely to get the fight to the ground, to have the top control. And that's kind of think we'll see. I think he might kind of be a slightly better everywhere. Give me Hiestand by decision.
Awesome. I agree with your entire breakdown there. The thing about Hiestand to me is, obviously, coming into the Ultimate Fighter 29 finale, I mean, even like waiting for the season to wrap and for the finale to come, like I knew something was up because like Ricky Turcios was avoiding me and wouldn't talk to me. I think because he was afraid of disclosing like things that he wasn't supposed to. We'll be talking about him in a minute. I'm very open in my love for the guy. But having said that, Hiestand should have beat Turcios at the tough finale. He lost mostly, I think, because he obliged Turcios with a Ricky Turcios fight. Turcios wants just a wild brawl on the feet that turns into wild scrambles on the ground and just kind of trusts himself to come out on top in those chaotic situations. Hiestand could have embraced his wrestling more fully, and I think just won a more straightforward decision over Turcios in that fight, and just couldn't do it. Maybe just too young, too inexperienced, too caught up in the moment. I'm going to guess that the year, the 15 months off or whatever it's been, is going to have served him well. He's at a good camp in Sikjitsu. He has some veteran training partners there. He's going to be just physically more mature, and he's already a pretty strong and athletic guy for the weight class. I'm expecting a better version of the Hiestand that we got in Tough. And yeah, even if he's the same guy he was, I think he's at least as good as Fernie Garcia. And if he is matured, if he is seasoned, if he's a more composed version of himself, I think he can beat Garcia with less risk to himself. Give me Hiestand by decision as well. And I fully agree with you that as the guy who's 7 years younger, he has more upside, but that is a tall hill to climb these days at 135. Next up on the UFC Vegas 65 undercard is a strawweight matchup between Vanessa Demopoulos and Maria Oliveira. Demopoulos, the 34-year-old Colorado native, is 8-4 overall. Or I'm sorry, not Colorado, Ohio. She is 8-4 overall. She is 2-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the 2020 season of Dana White's Contender Series. She lost there, but picked up a couple wins in LFA, got signed to the UFC, where she lost her debut to JJ Aldrich. Since then, she has won back-to-back fights over Silvana Gomez Juarez and Jin Yu Fry. The most recent of those, the Fry fight, was at UFC on ESPN, Sarukian versus Gamrot, back in June. She will look to make it 3 in a row and go 3-0 on the year against Oliveira. The 25-year-old Brazilian is 13-5 overall. She is 1-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series Brazil, where she lost, but went back to Brazil, won a couple more fights, got signed to the UFC last October, where she dropped a unanimous decision to Tabitha Ricci in her debut. She came back from that in June at UFC on ESPN, Cater versus Emmett, and won a split decision over Gloria de Paula. So she'll be looking to make it 2 in a row here. She is the slight favorite to do so, minus 120 as the favorite. Demopoulos available at even money, plus 100 as the very slight underdog. Keith, on the face of it, this looks kind of like your classic striker versus grappler matchup to me. Tell me if you see it any differently than that, and who you think wins this one.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But like, we want to put this like caveat out there when we say striker versus grappler. Like, when it's not 1995 where the guy who's the striker has no grappling skills and the person who's a grappler has no striking skill. Like, they both have, but they have their specialists. Like, Demopoulos wants to get to the ground and Oliver wants to standing.
Yep.
But Demopoulos has shown that she can strike a little bit, and Oliver actually has gotten some takedowns in her career and stuff. So, I just want to put that caveat out there, because sometimes people say, "Oh, well, you didn't. What about this person got a takedown in the last fight?" Like, yeah, I understand that. So yeah, like, even though I said that, like, Demopoulos isn't a striker, but I'll say that she's getting better. I give her credit. She does some things pretty sound. She keeps her strikes in tight. She can be a little right hand happy, but it was actually her overhand right that buckled Jin Yu Fry. I do want to put this out there. I actually thought Jin Yu Fry beat her, but not a robbery or anything like that. She tends to lack power because she pulls her punches. It's because I think she tries to pull her head out to avoid strikes because she lacks defense, because she gets tagged a lot. But to her credit, she eats shots, and she's freaking tough. Like, say what you want about Demopoulos, and people throw little jokes on based on her past, but she can take a beating. She gets in the clinch. She's a dirty boxer, can land some good shots. She isn't a strong wrestler, and that's probably the worst part of her game for someone who wants to get the fight to the ground. She's not a powerful wrestler. She struggles a lot of times. She'll shoot without a setup. But once she does get to the ground, she actually has some creative ways. She'll pull guard. She'll throw an M&R. She'll do anything else. But when she gets to the ground, she's really good. she's a 5-time world champion. She's incredibly flexible. She can catch a sub anywhere. Arm bars have kind of become a little bit of a specialty, kind of like a Ronda Rousey thing. But she's got great flexibility, some slick back takes. That's kind of her thing. Oliveira's a kickboxer. She's long and lengthy. Good volume. Bit of an outside kickboxer. I'd say her hands are okay. I like when she comes inside that she changes up to elbows, slicing elbows. But kicks that's her bread and butter. Really big kicking game. Calf kicks are probably her strongest weapon, though she'll also throw kicks to the head, throw kicks to the body. She will sometimes throw some naked kicks with her chin high, and she's got to get blasted for that. She also makes other defensive holes. She backs straight up. I've seen her back straight up to the cage, which would not be a good idea going against someone like Demopoulos. I do like her clinch game, though. Because she's longer and bigger, she gets really good angles from her size. Like I mentioned, she will wrestle a little bit, but she definitely needs to improve her top control. She's not a submission threat. She has, I think, of her 12 victories, she has 1 submission. Oliver should have the edge on his feet, basically due to her size advantage. But she's no threat on the ground to Demopoulos. I see Demopoulos might struggle to get it there right away, but eventually I think she gets the fight to the ground. I think she locks in a submission and give me Demopoulos to keep winning streak going, and I see she gets a first round submission.
Yeah, I made a mistake in assessing Demopoulos, I think, on her way up, like her appearance on the Contender Series, her fights in LFA. Of course, she got on the radar in the first place for that submission of the year candidate 2 years ago, where she got Sam Hughes in that inverted triangle choke.
Yeah. Just when I took it out of my notes, because I'm like, I want to stop mentioning that, Ben adds it in there.
I added in there, like, we have to advance our narrative on Demopoulos just one step at a time. So tonight, it's no stripper jokes. Her next fight, we'll stop talking about the inverted triangle choke. We're just going to move ahead like kind of 6 months at a time. But because of her grappling plaudits and because of her build, because she's short, stocky, and just built like a tank, I think I assumed she was a better takedown artist than she is. And in fact, there's someone else we're going to talk about later on this card that I've had to come to the same realization about. But in her case, yeah, like for someone who looks like she should be able to shoot just like a Michael Chandler, like bowling ball double leg through a woman's hips, she really can't. And she ends up doing very jiu-jitsu-y ways to get the fight to the ground, trips, standing back takes, pulling guard. But I just feel as though, even though Oliveira has a bunch of knockout and TKO wins, they are typically from an accumulation of damage. She doesn't really one-shot people, which almost nobody at strawweight does. I think it could take Demopoulos a while before she's able to start getting this to the ground, but I don't think she'll be taking so much damage in the meantime that she's going to get finished or is going to be hopelessly behind by the time she does. I'm with you here. I'm leaning with the slight underdog in Demopoulos. I don't know if it'll be a first round thing. I could see her having just real trouble navigating the reach of Oliveira, for that first round. Maybe gets jabbed up a little bit, we'll see how much kicking Oliveira does against someone that she knows really, really probably wants to bring her to the ground. But I'm going to say in the second round, she does start getting this thing to the ground. And once it's there, I think the first time Demopoulos gets her down, I think the round is certainly over and the fight might be. Give me Demopoulos by second round submission here. I'd feel more comfortable about this pick if I thought Demopoulos could do the kind of job on Oliveira that Tabitha Ricci did, where Tabitha Ricci is explosive and willing to wrestle and just basically ragdolled Oliveira for much of their fight. That isn't Demopoulos, but I do think she's going to find a way to get this fight to the ground in the middle round, and from there it's going to be academic. Vanessa Demopoulos, second round submission. We head now to the men's bantamweight division for a matchup between Ricky Turcios and Kevin Natividad. Turcios, the 29-year-old Houstonian, is 11-3 overall. He is 1-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series, where he lost, but then he competed on Tough 29. He won that, defeating Hiestand in the final. And since then, he has fought once more at UFC on ESPN Dos Anjos versus Fiziev in July, where he dropped a unanimous decision to Ayman Zahabi. He will look to get things back on track against Natividad. The 29-year-old Arizonan is 9-3 overall. He is 0-2 since joining the UFC as a standout from Legacy Fighting Alliance. He has been knocked out in both of his UFC appearances. His first, back on the October card in 2020, he got knocked out in the third round by Miles Johns, who appears further up this card, and came back this April at UFC 261, where he got knocked out in just 50 seconds by Dana Batkari. He is potentially fighting for his job here, certainly fighting for any remaining shine as a bantamweight prospect, and he is the underdog. Turcios is minus 150 right now, Natividad plus 130. I alluded to it earlier when talking about Hiestand. There are Texas fighters, there are Houston fighters, and then there are guys that I just actually know and like. I like Ricky Turcios. It's impossible not to like him, I think, if you meet him up close and personal. it comes off of him anytime you see him on the mic. He's just this super effusive, joyful guy. And for what it's worth, it is 100% genuine and unfeigned. There's no switch that turns off and on with Turcios. I mean, I've interviewed Turcios after Fury fighting championship events where he was at kind of a downturn in his career, and after getting just relatively meaningless wins in the grand scheme of things, he's just bubbling like he just won the Super Bowl and he's telling you he's going to Disneyland. Yeah, impossible not to like the guy. He's a guy with, if I'm being honest, he's a marginal UFC talent. He has some things he does well. He's pretty athletic. He has good individual component skills, doesn't always put them together for the best possible performances. Like his fight IQ isn't what it could be. And that's kind of surprising for a guy that basically lives at Gracie Baja Woodlands with Alex Morono and then splits his camps at Team Alpha Male. Like he's under good tutelage, but you know, in the regionals and on his way up, like I say, he's a wild man. He wants to get in a brawl, which as kind of a lanky, low power, high volume striker, it makes for fun fights, but not always to his best advantage. He's a good scramble heavy grappler who could probably be more dangerous if he were more positionally sound, but he just wants to do wild stuff and, you know, go for flying back takes and stuff. I became a little more concerned about him. I figured he'd slot in as just, you know, he might never be a top 15 guy, might never fight for a title, but would just settle in as a good mid-card bantamweight in the UFC and probably rack up 10 or 12 fights. But the Aiemann Zahabi fight was such a problem for me. Like Zahabi coming back from, I think, a year and a half off, Zahabi himself not a great fighter, and he and Turcios, like, not only did Turcios lose, and I thought he rightfully lost, but it was an absolutely miserable fight to watch. Like they were both hesitant and gun shy. They were both missing strikes just by being too far away from each other. It was like watching Caitlin Chukagian shadowbox a mirror. You know, just two people swinging from way too far away and not actually hitting anything. Someone had to win. That's concerning.
Chukagian and Holly Holm fought each other.
Yeah. Like, oh, give me earplugs.
It'd be like you play a video game and you like try to learn. You're like, hey, let's not hit each other. Let's like learn. And you're both in like different corners, like throwing kicks and punches.
Having said that, Natividad is, I think, even lower level. You know, just there's not much he does at a UFC level. Like he's a serviceable wrestler, but I think it's a little overstated. I think he gets just the assumed stamp of guy coming from Arizona Combat Sports must be a good wrestler. He's a serviceable boxer with some power, but as has been shown in his 2 UFC fights, he is defensively porous and prone to getting caught and starched. Now, Turcios doesn't have anywhere near the power of Miles Johns or Dana Batgare, but if he's able to hit Natividad cleanly to the head a bunch of times, it's going to be at least enough to win rounds. And I don't have any faith that Natividad is going to be able to take Turcios down and get him in any kind of trouble there. Turcios is going to be bigger. He's the kind of fighter that doesn't like to play jiu-jitsu off his back. He does like to scramble and refuse to concede the takedown. I think this is just kind of a nightmarish fight for Natividad. I think the line is about right here because, you know, to quote, you know, my co-host Keith here, Ricky Turcios shouldn't be a minus 300 favorite over anybody in the UFC, but minus 150 over Kevin Natividad sounds about right to me. Give me Turcios by decision in a fun fight. Please let it at least be a fun fight this time, but nothing that even scares up any fight of the night talk.
Yeah, I think your breakdown was really good, especially on Turkey. I was like, who knows with this dude? I mean, you talk about his last fight not being fun. Like he did more like clapping and stomping his feet and screaming than landing strikes. It was just a really, really weird fight, which is weird because in the past he's kind of been a pressure volume striking kind of guy. Like his output was never the problem. He's always been unorthodox, you said, based on his fighting style and his personality. He's a character, that's for sure. Herky jerky kind of style, constantly switching stances. He'll kind of have like a hold your ground when he's being pressured by his opponent's style. Opponents have a hard time picking up his timing due to all the crazy stuff that he does. He does a lot of up and down feints, which you don't see in MMA as much as I think we should, especially for someone who wants to get takedowns. It really sets up your strikes. I say he has fast hands. I like that he throws the combinations. His check right hook from the southpaw stance is probably his best strike. He blends punches and kicks together really well. I love that, he likes to throw down in the pocket and brawl, which shows his toughness, even though he's a guy who doesn't have power. But he can take a beating. Like, you go back to, like, the Dan Argueta fight. Like, he ate some big shots from Argueta and just kept coming. As you mentioned, I think he's an underrated wrestler. He can shoot through your hips. He does have, like, a Michael Chiesa reaching style. He has a weaker takedown defense. He was taken down multiple times on the Ultimate Fighter show. But he's a submission threat. He gets subs off his back. I like that he's actively tossing up submission hacks, changing from one sub to another. And I also like that he can use a submission to give himself space to get up and get off the back. Like, he's not a guy who plays too much jiu-jitsu. His best strength is his cardio, and cardio is kind of like a tool for him. That's why he really needs to up the pace, because his output is what brings everything together for him. And that last fight was just so weird. Natividad, I'm a little higher on him than you are, I'd say, but I'm not going to say I'm higher on him. He's got some things. He's very physically strong. He's a big bantamweight. That's kind of what he has going for him. He's a bit of a wild man on the feet. He wants to throw in the pocket, so we could have some really wild exchanges if they both stand in the pocket and throw some heat. He wants to be the one pressing the action instead of being pushing back, which I really think is the key for Turcios, is kind of forcing him back. I'd say he has plus power. He does sit on his punches, but it leaves him open to calf kicks. And he does throw some hard kicks himself. I'm giving that. He's I wouldn't say he's a grappler. You mentioned that about his wrestling. I don't think he's that great a wrestler. More of a clinch grappler. He'll get in there and upper body locks, some inside trips. I like that if he gets on top, he does look to advance position. He kind of goes to certain submissions. He likes the head and arm triangle, typical wrestling type moves. I saw him hit some Kimuras, so that's another one of his go-to. I think it's actually a pretty even matchup. I say Turcios' stock really plummeted after his last fight, but I'm with you. I'm picking him. Because of Natividad's style, it is hard to kind of match. Let me back. Because of how Natividad fights, he really throws hard power shots. It's going to be hard for him to match Turcios' output. Plus, Turcios is the better wrestler. I think he can get a takedown or two to kind of win the wrestling exchanges. I could see him catching submission, and I'm gonna go with that. I see he catches a submission. I'll say he does it late in the fight. I'll say he does it in third round.
There we go. 2 picks for Ricky Turcios to get back on track at 135. Next up, the third of 3 men's bantamweight matchups on the undercard of UFC Vegas 65. This time it is Vince Morales versus Miles Johns. Morales, the 32-year-old Idaho native by way of Las Vegas, is 11-6 overall. He is 3-4 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series, where he lost, but ended up subsequently signed anyway. He was last in the octagon in May at UFC Fight Night Home versus Vieira, where he dropped a unanimous decision to Jonathan Martinez. Prior to that, he had won 2 in a row over Draco Rodriguez and Louis Smolka. He will try to get back in the W column against Johns. The 28-year-old Kansas native by way of Dallas-Fort Worth is 12-2 overall. He is 3-2 in the UFC since joining as a veteran of the third season of the Contender Series. He also lost his last time out. It was an arm triangle choke submission, actually technical submission, at the hands of John Castaneda. That was back in February at UFC Fight Night Hermansson versus Strickland. Johns clearly chose to go to sleep, go out, go Betty Buys. Prior to that, he had won 2 in a row over Kevin Natividad and Anderson Dos Santos. So 2 prospect bantamweights looking to get back in the W column. Johns is the slight favorite to do so. He's -140. Morales plus 120 on the comeback. Keith, Vince Morales, Miles Johns, 2 guys that are hovering right around 500 in the UFC's toughest division. My gut feeling says both of them are probably a little better than their record, but then at the same time, in this division now, you are your record. You're
That's right.
Like there is no I'm better than my record. You are what your record is, and it's just an unforgiving landscape. Who gets a little bit of redemption here?
Yeah, I think both guys are going to be really desperate to get a win. It could be Cutlass for the loser there. Morales, he's a high output striker, a bit of a pressure counter striker. He likes to slip and rip on the counters. I'd say he's pretty accurate, and he's got some decent pop in his hands. I've said this before. He has a killer instinct. If he hurts his opponent, he really swarms in and tries to finish in. One of the biggest issues he's had so far in the UFC is checking leg kicks. Jonathan Martinez murdered him with leg kicks in their fight. Again, that loss has aged really well, so we'll say that. I like that he looks for takedowns, even though he's not a wrestler. Good entries, weak takedown defense overall. He has 2 submission wins, but he also has two losses that come by way of submission. So, to me, nothing really jumps out of you, Morales. Now, Miles Johns, he's a short, compact wrestle boxer, a lot of feints, works behind the jab, which he follows that up. He follows the jab up with hard hooks, hard uppercuts. He tends to load up on everything. He really looks like a guy who's trying to get that highlight walk-off KO, which he actually has some, but that's it seems like lately he's going to that more and more. And he does have the power, but he can overthrow his shots because of that. And because he's loading up, it leaves him to be countered, it leaves him to be taken down by lesser wrestlers than, lesser credentialed wrestlers than he is. And he struggled with guys picking up their timing and movement. As now the guy who lost to Mario Batista, his movement really, he struggled with that because you're loading up, you're trying to land to a spot. It's hard to get that. Again, that loss is aged well. He has some hard leg kicks, but he doesn't check leg kicks. He's a good wrestler with really fast entries, good at winning scrambles. But my issue is he has completely abandoned his wrestling. He hasn't got a takedown in 4 fights for a guy that was his go-to. And then though striking was the complement to the wrestling game, I really think he needs to go back. And if it might be that he's lost it for good, it might be too hard for him at this point to kind of do late in the fights. The strength about his wrestling was he was really physically strong. He grabbed a leg and you're going flying. Good ground and pounding on top. I don't like that he likes to attack the head when he's getting taken down. He likes to go to guillotines and barbell chokes, which is fun if you get it, but it puts you on your back. I've seen him lose positions to weaker wrestlers. He gives up his back when he gets back to his feet, and he was subbed in his last fight in a fight that, besides he had submission, he looked terrible the entire fight. So everyone who's watched this show for a while knows that wrestle boxers are my weakness. Not that I only fought once, but I would have been categorized as a wrestle boxer type. I hate that Johns has been in wrestling. He's also taking this fight on short notice, which is concerning, especially if I want him to go back to wrestling. Will he wrestle if he doesn't have the cardio? But I'm picking him. I'm picking him for this last time. If he doesn't wrestle and he loses to Vince Morales, I'm probably not picking him again. He has the power advantage on the feet, and he has that wrestling card. I think he can mix the two up. Give me Johns by decision.
Yeah, I love a lot of the things you pointed out about these guys, and especially about Johns, the negative as well as the positive. Because, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like, I enjoy wrestle boxers as well. Same as you. You know, I came to MMA in the first place because I loved amateur wrestling, and when some of my favorite wrestlers started crossing over to this cage fighting thing, I wanted to see, and sometimes it was great, you know. Sometimes the results were not so great, you know. We've talked about this before. I was there when I saw Townsend Saunders win his NCAA title. Then I also saw his his MMA run, and it wasn't great stuff.
No.
But you're only a wrestle boxer if you keep wrestling enough to keep the threat of that there.
That's right.
Like the classic wrestler overhand right fastball only works if your opponent is constantly dropping his guard because he thinks you're going to shoot in on his hips.
That's right.
Like Randleman didn't knock out Krokop with one punch because he was a better striker. It's because Krokop was expecting him to shoot, and instead he gets clocked. And you're right. Like, Johns has abandoned that, and every wrestler gets strikeritis eventually, but 25 when it happened is awful young for that to happen. And I know that his wrestling career was derailed by injuries, but his MMA career early on, he was perfectly willing to wrestle. And you classify his wrestling perfectly, like blinding fast shot from the outside, and then the kind of strength to finish takedowns that normally aren't in good position to finish. Like, he's not at either of their level, but would do stuff that reminds me of like Michael Chandler or Yoel Romero, where, okay, this isn't such a great, like, I didn't get a great single here, but I'm just going to turn it into a high crotch and throw you over my shoulder. Like, just that kind of thing, you know? If there were ever a fight for him to re-embrace his wrestler, this is it. Because you mentioned Jonathan Martinez cut Vince Morales to pieces with leg kicks. He also got an easy takedown on him. Like, Jonathan Martinez is not known as a lights-out wrestler. He's not known as any kind of wrestler. He's known as, you know, a kick-heavy kickboxer, and he shot, you know, a gorgeous takedown on Vince Morales and basically just snuffed out the rest of that round. If Jonathan Martinez can do that to Morales, Johns absolutely can. I think even if the bad Miles Johns shows up, he can probably beat Morales as long as he isn't just as flat as he looked against Castaneda. But assuming that was just a one-off bad performance, if he's the guy that just sort of clocked Natividad and Dos Santos, I think that guy beats Morales. But I think if he's willing to come out and wrestle, or at least wrestle in the first round so that Morales has it in the back of his mind for the rest of the fight, he can win, and he can win more definitively, and he can win with less risk to himself. I don't know which of those things happens, but those are, you know, both scenarios that end up with Miles Johns getting his hand raised at the end. I'm going to say Johns comes out, doesn't wrestle as much as we would like, maybe wrestles not at all, but still gets the better of a striking battle on the feet. If he wrestles, that'll be a pleasant surprise, and that will make me think a little more about his future in the division. But for the time being, at least, he keeps his job on Saturday. Give me Johns by decision. Next up at UFC Fight Night 215, we have a women's flyweight matchup between Jennifer Maia and Maryna Moroz. Now, before I dig into this intriguing undercard matchup, just prior to this segment, Keith and I took a quick break. When we returned to our seats, I saw you sit back down in your chair. Does your shirt say "World's Greatest Farter" on it?
Yeah, sorry, it's just my sweatshirt. I was getting hot. Yeah, that's what my kids think they're funny.
So it says "World's Greatest Farter" and then it's crossed out and it says "Father" underneath.
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. your kids rule. All right.
Maybe trying to be professional. I wear a sweatshirt. I forgot I take it off when I get up.
With that important detail out of the way, Maia, the 34-year-old Northeast Brazilian, is 19-9-1 overall. She is 4-5 in the UFC, and she is on a 2-fight losing streak. Both of those being unanimous decision losses this year. She dropped a decision to Caitlin Chukagian back in January at UFC on ESPN, Kattar versus Chikadze. Then a unanimous decision once again to Manon Fior at UFC on ESPN, Blades versus Dawkins in March. She is back in the cage for the first time in 8 months, and waiting for her is Moroz. The 31-year-old Ukrainian is 11-3 overall. She is 6-3 in the UFC. She's on a 3-fight winning streak, but that's a little deceptive to say because those 3 wins are spaced out across almost 4 full years. She beat Sabina Mazo all the way back in March of 2019, came back in March of 2020 and beat Mayra Bueno Silva. Fought this March at UFC 272, where she choked out Maria Agapova in the second round. So a very protracted win streak for the Iron Lady. She is looking to make it 4 in a row, and she is actually a moderate favorite to do so. She's minus 175, Maia plus 150. And Keith, I think this line is absolutely bananas. I understand the bookmakers aren't the ones who make the lines. Well, I mean, they set the lines, but they don't pull them out of their ass. They set them in reaction to what the bettors are doing. But I have to say, this has to be the work of somebody that does not take strength of schedule into account. Jennifer Maia is 4-5 in the UFC, but her losses in the UFC are to Liz Carmouche, a pound-for-pound top 10 woman, Caitlin Chukagian twice, the clear number 2 in the division, Valentina Shevchenko, and Manon Fior, who will probably fight for a title next year. That's it. She's beaten everybody else, and some of them are good fighters. She beat Jessica Ai. She beat Alexis Davis. She beat Joanne Wood and Roxanne Modafferi, like both of which were better wins at the time than it sounds like now. There's a pretty clear dividing line. Jennifer Maia loses to the very best fighters in the world. She beats everybody else, and it's all decisions. Like, she's now got 9 straight decisions in the UFC. I think she catches Chukagian, what? Chukagian's record is that, like, she has, I think, 10 or 11, her first 10 or 11 wins in the UFC were all by decision. Like, Maia is heading on a record-breaking streak of all of her fights going to decision.
That's a record you want.
Yeah. But the women who've beaten Maia, aside from being, again, the best fighters in the world, have tended to be women that are much better at Maia than Maia at one thing or another. Moroz is not that. And Moroz's record in the UFC on paper looks better, but she's simply just never beaten a really good UFC flyweight. Mayra Bueno Silva is probably the best, the closest she's gotten to that. She was big when she fought at strawweight, just long, lanky, just kind of seemed impossibly big for strawweight. She's still a pretty good size flyweight. She's physically strong, and that translates into good grappling. Like, she absolutely ran over people like Joanne Wood, Sabina Masso, who just didn't have the physical strength to handle her on the ground. But Maia is far more well-rounded. I think Maia is a better striker. Moroz, despite being, big and having good reach, I think she's kind of susceptible on the feet. She's not very fast. Moroz, she is a bit of a specialist, and her specialty, I don't think she's better than Maia at all, really. And if she is, it's not better on the level of, Liz Carmouche is overpoweringly physical and a good wrestler, and Maia can't handle that. Or Chukagian just is too good of an out striker and just mesmerizes everybody, and Maia can't unhypnotize herself. Moroz has none of that. I don't get why she's the favorite, except that she's on a 3-fight win streak and Maia is on a 2-fight losing streak, but the strength of schedule could not possibly be more different. I think Maia gets a bounce back here. She gets back to 500 in the UFC, and she reminds us that while Chukagian has been the gateway to the title shot, Maia might as well be the gateway to the top 10. If you're a top 10 fighter, you might be able to beat her. If you're not, there's no way you're getting past her. Give me a Maia by decision, and for the complexion of the fight, my guess would be that Maia chooses to keep this on the feet. Moroz can't get it to the ground, and Maia kind of pieces her up on the feet. I think she's a harder hitter, and even though Moroz is probably going to have better reach, I don't think she's going to be able to keep Maia off her.
You know what? So I don't do this often, but just for the sake of time, I agree with everything you're saying. So put me down for my decision. I don't need to read the same stuff that everything you said. Dude, I agree with.
That's the nicest thing anybody said to me all day. Anybody who watches our show knows that Keith is by far more the X's and O's guy, and I'm teeing it up, and it's why I make him go first on about 2/3 of these fights. But both these women have a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
This is the 10th fight for both of these women in the UFC. I've previewed at least 4 Jennifer Maia fights. These women are what they are, and Maia's a better fighter.
Yeah, I would say this. If you told me to guess who the favorite was, I would have guessed Maia 2-1 favorite to be an underdog. And I looked at the lines. She started at plus 135, and it's opening how much of it she's becoming a bigger underdog. Again, I don't see it. I know that Moroz is a really underrated grappler. She's a bit of a volume striker on the feet, but Maia hits harder. She gets in the pocket. I like how she had a competitive battle recently against Manon Fior. She lost it, but it was competitive. Yeah, I'm with you. Give me Maia.
She arguably took a round off Valentina Shevchenko.
Yeah, give me Maia.
Yeah. We head now to the men's flyweight division for a matchup between Charles Johnson and Zhalgas Zhumagulov. Johnson, the 31-year-old Missouri native, is 11-3 overall. He is 0-1 since joining the UFC as a former LFA flyweight champ. Got kind of a hard beat. I mean, he was signed, immediately thrown into a matchup with super prospect Muhammad Mokaev, where he acquitted himself fairly well in a unanimous decision loss. That was at UFC Fight Night Blades versus Aspinall, the second UFC London card this year. So even more of a setup since Mokaev is very much an adoptive son of the UK. He now gets his payback for doing the UFC a solid in the form of the struggling Zhumagulov. The 34-year-old Kazakhstani is 14-7 overall. He is 1-4 in the UFC since joining as a former Fight Night's global flyweight champ. He has dropped fights to Raulian Paiva, Amir Albazi, Manel Kape, and Jeff Molina. Those 4 losses sandwiched around a first-round submission win over Jerome Rivera last July. So he's on a 2-fight losing streak right now. He's lost 4 of 5. He is quite possibly fighting for his continued employment, and he is a slight underdog. He's he's plus 135. Johnson minus 155. Keith, you and I both, me probably even a little more, have continued to beat the drum that Zhumagulov is better than his record, but even at flyweight, at some point you are what your record is, and he's lost to just nothing but good fighters. Raulian Paiva, good fighter. Amir Albazi, good fighter. Manel Kape. And then Jeff Molina, who was the least hyped of them, but all of a sudden Jeff Molina's 3-0 in the UFC flyweight division, and he's creeping up on the rankings too. Just he's gotten no kind of break. Is Johnson enough of a break for him to get back in the W column, or does this just end up being one absolutely miserable run for the guy?
Yeah, it's just flyweight in general. Like there's no easy fight at flyweight. I mean, like the worst guy on the flyweight roster is still really talented. It's just a great division. Not the deepest division, like that's why it's not in the discussion. But the talent level is incredible.
Yeah.
I'll say this about Zhumagulov. He does everything fairly well. He's a southpaw who's a high output. He's a pressure striker. He can go hard for all 15 minutes. He throws a lot of combos. They're very like Fedor style, where he throws a lot of looping hooks. His left hook is his money shot. He's not the hardest hitter though, which I mean that's something that has to do with just being a flyweight. But he can grind. He can get in the clinch. He likes to grind. Use get inside. Not a great wrestler, but he'll somehow get away, get some takedowns, and he's got some really really good cardio. Johnson is another guy that I was excited to have him coming in. He's a kickboxer. He can fight out both stances, really elusive, constantly moving, pretty good footwork. He's hard to hit because he's got some good head movement. He also like rolls with his punches, which again never really looks great to the judges, but it's just hard to land clean. He doesn't like being pressured though. He's got good volume, not a big puncher, not a big like power puncher, but he just touches and scores points. Large kicking game. He loves his teep kicks, though he does so often throw him naked. He also likes stepping knees, which you know I love that. Not a great wrestler, but he'll catch a kick or something to try to get the fight to the ground. Good ground and pound. He has 3 submission wins. Weak defensive wrestler, but from what I've seen, he does a good job to get back to his feet and good cardio. We've seen him fight 5 rounds in the LFA and stuff, so he can go hard. This should be a really good fight. I guess I'm going the underdog again. I'm leaning Zhumagulov. I think he can force Johnson back on his back foot, force him out of his comfort zone. I think he actually might get his takedown to himself, might win some grinding affair. I think it's going to be really competitive, but I'm going to say some Zhumagulov, and I'll say he wins by unanimous decision.
Yeah, I like this matchup. Well, I mean, I don't like it if this is Zhumagulov just washing out of the UFC at 1-5, and this was like his last chance to get a win. But I mean, you got to beat the people who are put in front of you at some point. Johnson, like you, I mean, we both said this on the preview for UFC London that it's a rough matchup to step in against Muhammad Mokaev. in England for your debut, but he's a guy that probably should have been signed to the UFC or at least come through the Contender Series this year anyway. I did like a lot of what I saw from him, even though he lost an easy 30-27 to Mokaev. As you pointed out, like, Mokaev took him down repeatedly, but he had to take him down repeatedly because Johnson kept getting back up. He just he denied Mokaev mount and back mount repeatedly and got back up over and over again, even as he was getting some like gnarly mat returns. Like he got slammed, he got suplexed, and just kept getting up. And I mean, the third round might have been the most competitive round, and it might have been just that Mokaev got tired of taking the guy down 20 times. Here, like, that same Charles Johnson, I think actually matches up pretty well against Zhumagulov. He's going to have a huge reach advantage. If he feels confident enough to unleash his full kicking game, either because he doesn't think Zhumagulov can take him down as easily as Mokaev did, or he just trusts himself to get back up or create good situations for himself on the ground, I think that works in his favor. Zhumagulov is definitely going to come forward. He's definitely going to put him on his back foot. We'll see how well he does there. But, Zhumagulov doesn't really have a fight-changing one-shot power. I think this is going to be an uncomfortable fight for Johnson, but I think he's going to do enough to win 2 rounds out of 3 here. He's going to deny enough takedowns. He's going to score enough from outside and just kind of frustrate Zhumagulov, and it's just going to be one more just miserable outing for the former Fight Nights global champ. Give me Johnson by decision here. We head now to the welterweight division for a matchup between Jack Della Maddalena and Danny Roberts. Della Maddalena, the 26-year-old Australian, is 12-2 overall. He is 2-0 since joining the UFC out of last year's Dana White's Contender Series. He debuted this January at UFC 270, knocking out Pete Rodriguez in the first round. Came back in June at UFC 275 and knocked out Ramazan Amaev in the first round. So he is 2-0 with just barely 1 round's worth of work. He'll look to keep the hot streak going at the expense of Roberts. The 35-year-old Brit who goes by Hot Chocolate is 18-6 overall. He is 7-5 in the UFC. He lost his last time out. It was a unanimous decision to Francisco Trinaldo at UFC 274 in May. Prior to that, he had been riding back-to-back wins over Zalim Imadaev and Ramazan Amaev. So he's looking to get back on track. He is not favored to do so. In fact, I believe Roberts is the biggest underdog on the card. Della Maddalena is minus 450. Roberts plus 360. Keith, I'm going to toss this one to you, but does it feel to me like you just woke up one day and Danny Roberts was suddenly 35? He was young when he got to the UFC, but just fighting basically once a year.
Yeah.
Just he's never built any momentum in a super deep division.
Yeah,
and
just a guy.
Now he's a setup guy for the new guy, the young guy, the hot prospect. Tell me how you think this fight goes.
Yeah,
I think I have a guess, but
yeah, Roberts is a guy. He wins 1 fight, loses 1 fight. That's pretty much sums up his UFC career. Just kind of a middle of the pack kind of guy. He's a big guy, and he needs a test because he has skills. He can fight at both stances. Pretty good footwork. Pretty elusive. He doesn't like to be pressured. He wants to be want to be in the center, working from a distance. Quick hands, nice snap on his shots. Though he'll kind of overthrow his left hand a little bit. He keeps his hands low, which helps him because he lands from different angles, and he has good power. But if he actually had better technique, he'd have even more power. He does throw hard kicks to the body, especially when he's in the orthodox stance, which I like. But defensively, he pillars, which I've never been a fan of. I definitely not in the MMA. His best work, like he either wants to be all the way out or all the way in. He gets inside. He's a big guy. He can grind in there. He can wrestle a little bit. He must improve his control, his top game. He also needs to improve his takedown defense as he's been taken down, and he doesn't like to be on his back. He's been held down before. Move over to Jack Della Maddalena, a guy that a lot of people are really high on. A really, really good boxer. Can fight out of both stances. He's a builder. We've seen that. He's a guy that he really picks up the pace as the fight goes on. Short, tight shots, not a lot of tells, very accurate, elusive, good footwork. I love that when he attacks, he cuts angles on his attacks. I like that he works the body, understands how important that is. When he gets in close, he starts throwing, slicing elbows like John Jones style. Good power, which is, I mean, he's at 9 knockouts, but what's really interesting about that is he's so young. He's not even in his power years yet, so who knows what kind of knockout power he can have. He is open to leg kicks because he's heavy on his front foot, like that's one of the negatives. But he's got a judo background, so you're getting close with him. He can trip, throw. He will shoot for takedowns. He'll shoot without setting up, which is a little bit of an issue, but he's really good at winning scrambles. Really funk style wrestler. When we've seen him taken down, he'll go to like a Granby roll to get out, which is good IQ. Also, you need a lot of athleticism in that. And generally, it's hard to take him down anyways. Roberts, I really don't know where he wins this fight. Like, does he want to get in the clinch with Maddalena? Maybe. Like, that's probably his best bet. I don't think he wants to stand on the outside. I mean, I guess he could throw some kicks and try to be in a kicking range with Maddalena, maybe. But I think this is a mismatch. I think Maddalena pieces him up on the feet. I think he overwhelms him as he gets stronger. I think Robert's going to fade. I think Maddalena makes a statement. Give me Maddalena by 3rd round TKO.
I'm with you here, and honestly, Jack Della Maddalena is a good testament to the power of the zero that you and I have talked about many times, because you look at his record, he's 12-2. He lost his first 2 fights as a pro. He is 12-0 since then, so he's won 12 straight fights. He won some good fights in Australia on the way up. He beat a good fighter who's in the UFC now in Angelusa on the Contender Series, and he's absolutely slaughtered the 2 people he's fought in the UFC. Yet, when we talk about Chimaev and Rakhmonov and Sean Brady, who, Sean Brady finally took his first L, we never mentioned Jack Della Maddalena there because of 2 meaningless losses at the beginning of his career. Never underestimate the power of the zero, but honestly, maybe we should be mentioning him in that same breath, because it's a similar trajectory where the thing that was really eye-popping about especially Chimaev and Rakhmonov is that they came to the UFC undefeated, and then they just shifted gears seamlessly and started murdering people in the UFC, like just blasting good fighters like, Cowboy Oliveira and Gerald Meerschaert just, in the first round. Jack Della Maddalena has done similar things, and I'm with you here. Roberts, kind of like we have said about multiple opponents of Chimaev and Rakhmonov, he is a logical next test. He is a battle-tested, well-rounded UFC veteran who's like big and athletic and at least pretty good everywhere. And Jack Della Maddalena, I think, is going to run through him with relative ease. And it's going to be one of those moments that makes us go, okay, maybe this guy needs a top 15 opponent sooner rather than later. Give me Jack Della Maddalena by 2nd round TKO. And I'm going to guess it happens on the ground. Like, he either takes Roberts down or hurts him and follows him there and actually has to do some work on the ground. But yeah, Jack Della Maddalena, 2nd round TKO on the ground after probably winning just about every minute of the fight up until then. The UFC Vegas 65 main card powers on with a middleweight matchup between Cody Brundage and Rodolfo Vieira. Brundage, the 28-year-old Michigan native, is 8-2 overall. He is 2-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the 2020 season of Dana White's Contender Series, where he lost, but then went back, won a fight in LFA, and was signed to the UFC. He dropped his debut by unanimous decision to Nick Maximov. Since then, he has back-to-back first-round finishes over Dalcha Lungiambula and Tresean Gore. The most recent of those, the Gore fight, was back in July at UFC on ESPN, Dos Anjos versus Fiziev. He will look to make it 3 straight against Vieira, the 33-year-old Brazilian who goes by the Black Belt Hunter, 8-2 in his mixed martial arts career, 3-2 in the UFC. He has alternated wins and losses over his last couple of fights. He infamously was upset by Anthony Hernandez by 2nd round submission last February at UFC 258. Came back with a 3rd round submission win over Dustin Stoltzfus last July. Came back this June at UFC on ESPN, Sarukian versus Gamrot, and dropped a unanimous decision to Chris Curtis. So he is looking to get back to winning ways. He is the moderate favorite to do so. Vieira is minus 180, Brundage plus 155. Keith, Rodolfo Vieira, one of the greatest grapplers of all time. Like we try not to throw around the term world class, too easily here. That's a MMA cliche, but he's literally a multiple time world champion, one of the greatest grapplers ever to cross over to MMA anywhere near his physical prime. Having said that, he's 33. He still only has 10 MMA fights. If he's going to do anything serious in MMA, it's go time. Is Brundage the right opponent, or is this where the dream kind of dies?
Yeah, it's an interesting matchup based on their backgrounds and their styles. I'll say this about Rodolfo Vieira. His stand-up is getting better. His stand-up looks better and better each fight. He's growing fast, and he throws a lot of straight shots down the pipe. He has good power. I mean, look at the guy's absolutely shredded. Mm-hmm. I mean, he lands a lot also, and you gotta keep saying this, and we talk about with the wrestlers, he lands because people are worried about the takedowns. No one wants to go to the ground with him, and rightfully so. He does get hit a lot, though, because he lacks head movement. He can eat some shots and keep coming. I mean, it's been 3 or 4 times now. I mean, Safarov landed big shots on him. Anthony Hernandez landed big shots on him. Chris Curtis was starting to tee off him, especially as the fight went deeper. And he's an explosive wrestler. He drives through your hips, extremely strong. But he's not a technically sound wrestler. He's the guy, he can get takedowns because he's fast. He's got some fast entries. But he's a grappler who wrestles. He's not a true wrestler. And you see that because he kind of has that straight on. He doesn't cut the corners well. He doesn't chain wrestle together. It's really why a guy like Chris Curtis was able to and Chris Curtis fought just a perfect fight against him. Just didn't overextend, just to short shots, never overextended. So he was always ready for the takedowns. As he started fading, that's when he started sitting on his punches more, started generating power. Just really good, smart performance from Chris Curtis. So he'll shoot without takedown. He won't chain wrestle together with it. That's a problem. He doesn't set anything up with his striking. That's the biggest thing. He needs to set up his striking to set up it. Use his striking to set up his entries. But if he gets you on the ground, I mean, you said it. This guy's elite. We've read his credentials before. We're not going to read it. I mean, his credentials are off the chart. He's definitely a top side grappler. That's where he wants to be, where he wants to work. But he can get submissions and transitions and scrambles on the bottom if he has to. But take you back, choke you out. Brundage is not a great striker. He's not a very technically sound striker, but he's a good athlete. It's kind of like the opposite of what I just said, like about Vieira. Vieira's not a technically sound wrestler, but he gets down because he's a great athlete. So it's kind of the same thing with Brundage. Like he's been landing. He doesn't do a lot of things technically right. He drops his hands. He does a lot of haymakers, but he has natural power because of the athlete he is. I mean, we saw that against Tresean Gore in his last fight. He's got a good kicking game. He throws kicks everywhere. He loves his question mark kick. I don't know if he's going to be kicking against a guy like Rodolfo Vieira. Despite having a wrestling background, I'm not sold on him as a wrestler. I said this last time. I'm continue to say it until I see him get someone who, and Rodolfo Vieira is a guy that could answer this question. Someone who really wants to take him down, and I actually want to see him shooting. He'll shoot without takedowns. I see him get sprawled out on because he doesn't cut angles. Eating shots. I go back to like the Shillan Duffy, and I know that's fight one, but like trying to get a takedown, he was eating nonstop elbows. If he's on top, he has a strong top game, but defensive wrestling. I mean, we saw Nick Maxwell take him down over and over again, which was really surprising. And even the last fight, despite getting the KO of Tresean Gore, he was slowing down because of there was a lot of big shots. The question comes down to if Vieira can take down Brundage. I mean, credential-wise, you should say that he shouldn't. I think Brundage will make a mistake. I think he's a wrestler who might have fallen in love with his power shots. I think he might overextend, and maybe Vieira ducks out and finds a way to get to the ground. And I think we might get some pretty good scrambles when that happens. But I think Vieira eventually is going to catch a submission. I think his back against the wall, he really, like you said, he needs to go now. I think this might be the beginning of it. I'll say Vieira wins by second round submission.
Yeah, I like everything you put down there. Like, and I alluded to this earlier when I said, there's another fighter on this card, kind of like Vanessa Demopoulos, where I think I assumed they were a better offensive wrestler than they were just because they looked kind of wrestly and they were, a demonstrably very good grappler. And Rodolfo Vieira is the other one. Because of his training affiliations, because of his general build, because of his credentials in the grappling world, I guess I just assumed he would have a little bit of Jacare Souza to him. Or, Jacare was one of the first of the world-class grapplers to come across and say, yeah, I'm a high-level jiu-jitsu black belt, but I also understand the principles of, good old American wrestling and have the necessary athleticism to put them to work.
I always thought, sorry to interrupt you, Ricardo Arona was like a really good example. Like going back a while ago, he was a really good topside grappler who wrestling was actually more impressive than his submission skills, even though his submission, his off the charts, his accomplishments, but similar style.
Similar style, and especially in Pride, under the full Pride medicine chest, was like, dude, that guy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, his had like the neck of Brock Lesnar, and he was like a 203-pound guy. He was unbelievable. He was a lot of fun.
Sometimes he was pretty boring.
Vieira, I like how you said like his wrestling runs on horsepower rather than technique, because he will shoot a great double because he's big, he's fast, but where a schooled wrestler, if the double gets sprawled on, he'll change to a single, he'll try to turn the corner. Vieira doesn't have a second idea. Like, if you sprawl him properly, if it's early enough in the fight, he can probably just pick you up anyway through brute force and dump you over. But once he's too tired to do that, say, about 8 minutes into the fight, he doesn't have another second idea, and it ends up looking like the Chris Curtis fight, where he was twice Curtis's size, and Curtis was defeating his takedown attempts with increasing ease as the fight went along. By the third round, these were just like desperate flopping takedown attempts, and Curtis was like laughing and dancing away and piecing him up. That is a game plan that Brundage probably could follow. He doesn't have the exact Chris Curtis skill set. Obviously, he has different physical tools, and his takedown defense has proven to be suspect. Like as you pointed out, like against Maximov. I still think it's something he could do to Vieira, but he would only have to make a mistake once if it's in the first half of the fight, and the thing might be over. Vieira, the one thing he does have is he is just a crushingly heavy topside grappler in MMA. It's why all of his submissions in MMA, I think, are arm triangle chokes, which is the definition of crushing someone from topside, or their rear naked chokes where somebody turned their back to him because they didn't like him just like mashing his like elbow into their throat. I actually think Brundage has more upside in the division. I think, 2 years from now, Vieira will be on his way back down. Brundage will just barely be 30, and he might not even have really hit his peak yet. But right now, I don't trust Brundage to put on a perfect Chris Curtis game plan. And I also don't trust Brundage to lose the first round badly and then be the fresher guy in the second and third in the way that Andrew Sanchez or Anthony Hernandez was. Because, that's still a route to victory over Vieira. His gas tank is still suspect. He got tired before Curtis. He finished Stoltzfus late just because he dominated him so bad the whole fight. Like, none of the things that have proven to work on Rodolfo Vieira so far in the UFC are things that I have an easy time picturing Brundage doing. So I'm with you. I'm going with the moderate favorite here. Give me Vieira by, I'm going to say second round submission. Brundage maybe walks the tightrope for the first round. Vieira is still fresh enough in the second to get him down, and then it's over pretty quickly from there. The UFC Fight Night 215 main card powers on with a matchup between Andre Fialho and Muslim Salikov. Fialho, The 28-year-old from Portugal is 16-5 with 1 no contest overall. He is 2-2 since joining the UFC just this year. This will be his 5th fight in 2022. He dropped his debut to Michel Pereira, got back-to-back wins over Miguel Baeza and Cameron Van Camp, then got somewhat shockingly knocked out by Jake Matthews in the 2nd round at UFC 275 in June. He'll look to go over 500 for the year against Salikov. The 38-year-old Dagestani is 18-3 overall. He is 5-2 in the UFC. He lost his debut to Alex Garcia all the way back in 2017. He got knocked out in the 2nd round by Li Jingliang this July at UFC on ABC Ortega versus Rodriguez, and in between he won 5 straight over Ricky Rainey, Nordine Taleb, Laureano Staropoli, Eliseo Capoeira, and Francisco Trinaldo. And if some of those names are barely ringing a bell, it's because Trinaldo, I think, is the only one of the 5 still in the UFC. That is a byproduct of Salikov being not very active. He's basically fought once per year for the last 6 years, and him being kind of the UFC's janitor and helping sweep fighters out the door who are on their way out. Nonetheless, he is the slightest of favorites here. Salikov -115, Fialho -105. Keith, we talk a lot, and I actually mentioned earlier on the show how much you have to do to kind of break through at 170. It does help if you're an exciting fighter, and both of these guys are. This is on the main card for a reason, and if somebody gets a big finish here, you know, they will jump the line to a certain extent. In both cases, I think because of their age. Fialho because he's so young, and Salikov because if he's gonna make a run, it's gotta be now. You know, when you're 38 and you fight once a year, the clock's ticking on you.
Yeah, and it's even worse coming off a loss like this. You take a loss in this division, you fall back so far.
Yeah, and neither of them were great losses. I mean, Jake Matthews kind of coming back out of nowhere.
Not bad.
And what's that?
Yeah, I mean, neither loss is bad.
I know neither of them is terrible, but you know, and then Salikov, you know, getting stopped by Li Jingliang, who is, I mean, he is effectively a gatekeeper to the top 10. So if you got knocked out by him, the gate got kept. Having said that, this is an interesting striking matchup to me because they're both strikers by preference. They both have power. I mean, they both have a ton of knockouts, but stylistically, they're about as different as you could get. You know, I think of Fialho as a boxer who can kick and has like growing power. I mean, he's still so young. He was super, super young when he first kind of popped up on prospect radar and, you know, had some kind of bad, weird losses early. He's almost in his 2nd life now as an up-and-comer. But yeah, I think of him as a very bread-and-butter boxer who is willing to mix in kicks. And then Salikov is, I mean, it's one thing to call yourself the king of Kung Fu, but it's especially ballsy to call yourself the king of Kung Fu when more than half of your regional career before the UFC took place in China. Like, you're a Russian dude over in China calling yourself the king of Kung Fu. That is brass balls.
That's a good point.
Maybe it's the counterweight of his balls that like allows him to do all that spinning stuff even as he pushes 40. Because
that's right.
I mean, there's 2 kind of Dagestanis. There's the grindy wrestler who is sublime if he's a great athlete and can be kind of boring if he's that's all he's got. And then there's the weird all spinning shit all the time like Dagestani strikers. Salikov to me is much more of the what's the name of the
Shlemenko style?
The Shlemenko. Who was the guy that like he looked like Abraham Lincoln? That Zabit Magomed Sharipov. Yeah, that's Salikov to me. And you'd think the fun would have to come to an end at some point, but even when he doesn't get the finish, he's just willing to keep throwing that stuff and catches people with it. But here, I mean, it's 170, it's not 135, but still 38 is old. He's never been that active a fighter. The sequence that Li Jingliang finished him with in July is something that I just don't think would have finished him 3 or 4 years ago. I think his time is kind of eclipsed and coming and going, whereas Fialho is never going to be a perfect fighter. Fialho was like Portuguese Robbie Lawler, where the greatness was never about being unbeatable, because Robbie Lawler has some bad losses at every point in his career, and just finally strung together enough wins in a row to like reach the pinnacle of the sport for about 6 months. And all that did was cement his legend because he was already everybody's favorite fighter. I'm not saying Fialho is going to reach the same heights, obviously, but he has some of that same energy. Like, he's 2-2 in the UFC right now, and I'm still excited about his upside, even though he's never going to be a perfect fighter. He's never going to string enough wins together that people are looking at him like Santiago Ponzinibbio or Leon Edwards and like, what's this guy need to do to get a title shot? No. If he strings together 3 good knockouts in a row, the UFC is going to start pushing him. I think one of them is going to happen this Saturday. I think Fialho is going to be able to land on Salikov, who even earlier in his career was always kind of hittable. Fialho just has bricks in both hands. Like, he doesn't look like a huge guy. He doesn't overswing most of the time, but just he's got the Dustin Poirier thing where when he lands, you can tell he hits harder than, like, it surprises his opponent how hard he hits. I think he's going to do that to Salikov. He's going to get in some wild exchanges. He's going to get the better of him. Give me Fialho to knock out Salikov in round 2 here.
Yeah, this is a good fun fight. I'm glad you said it's going to be really good. I think it's a hard fight to pick. Fialho is a counter striker. You mentioned he's a really good, technically sound boxer. He gives everything in tight. His overhand right is moneymaker. His check left hook is really good. That was the blow that just like obliterated Cameron Van Camp. He's got good power. You mentioned 13 KOs. He does pillar, which I don't like. And I'm a little worried about his chin. I mean, he's been knocked out a bunch of times now. And he was knocked down in his last fight. I'd say he's an underrated wrestler. He gets some good entries. He's hard to take down. But if you can pin him against the canvas, based on not coming from that style, he really struggles to get back to his feet. I'll say this about Salikov. He's a really good athlete. He moves well. He's got good movement, good at slipping his head off the center line and countering and ripping with his own shots. Really good at picking up his opponent's timing, which is going to be tough as you age, because if that's the kind of style that you are, it's gone overnight. And that's the question we have to ask with him, being that he's getting older. But he has some of the best kicks in the games, kicks everywhere. He checks kicks, which I also like too. You mentioned he has that like Alexander Slamenko spinning attacks, spinning back fist, spinning kicks, everything. Plus power. He really sits on his punches. I go back to like when he starts Nordine Taleb. But I am worried about his chin. I mean, he's knocked out by Li Liang in his last fight. He's 38 years old. He can wrestle, and he actually wrestles a lot. I think he's an underrated wrestler. He's got a good reactionary double. I mean, even a fight where he lost, like Li Liang, he took him down in that fight. He also catch kicks. Not that I expect to get many kicks from Fialho, but that's one way to get it. But he does need to improve his control on the ground. I think this is the hardest fight to pick on the entire card. I think both guys can be brilliant at times, but they both also look bad at times, including their last fight. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go with Salikov. And the reason I'm going to go with Salikov is I know he will wrestle. I think he will be the guy who will wrestle more. Fialho has struggled, not stopping takedowns, but getting back up. So being that is an option if things are going bad for Fialho, obviously for Salikov against Fialho on the feet, I like that. I think he can win some rounds. I think both guys are going to have their moments. I wouldn't be surprised if both guys land big shots or rock each other. But I'm going to take Salikov, no confidence at all, so I'll go by split decision.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is probably the hardest fight on the card for me to pick as well. So we have a little more dissension here. You can tell probably which one of us was right on Saturday just by whether Greg Jones is angry in between rounds at Andre Fialho.
Yeah, Greg Jones, what an incredible wrestler he was.
Next up at UFC Vegas 65 is a heavyweight matchup between Chase Sherman and Waldo Cortes-Acosta. Sherman, the 33-year-old Mississippi native, is 16-10 overall. He is 4-9 across 2 stints in the UFC. He's 2-4 this time around. Got back on track. He snapped a 4-fight losing streak with his 3rd-round knockout of Jared Vanderaa back in July at UFC on ESPN Dos Anjos versus Fiziev. So got the reprieve, kept his roster spot. Looks to make it 2 in a row, a win streak in the UFC against Cortes-Acosta. The 31-year-old, I want to say he is Panamanian by way of Arizona, is 8-0 in his mixed martial arts career. He is 1-0 since joining the UFC out of Dana White's Contender Series. I mean, he won on the Contender Series in August. He debuted in the UFC with a unanimous decision over Jared Vanderaa on Halloween weekend. He's coming back on 3-week turnaround to take on Sherman, and he is the moderate favorite. He's minus 190. Sherman is plus 160. And this has all been kind of a weird game of musical chairs. Sherman was supposed to fight on the 5th at UFC Vegas 64. He was supposed to fight. Josh Parisian withdrew from that fight, so they bumped Sherman to this card, and they brought Cortes-Acosta back on, again, very short turnaround, to come back and get his second dose. Keith, if this fight had been Cortes-Acosta's first fight in the UFC, and if this had been before Sherman beat Vanderaa, I might have a very different take on this fight, because obviously, you know me, like, I am extremely diplomatic and positive in my assessment of fighters, but I mean, I have had a little fun at Chase Sherman's expense just because his UFC run has been so legendarily miserable. And I picked Vanderaa to beat him. He beat Vanderaa, and his low power, high volume style proved that actually, well, he does rack up enough punishment if you run into his fist for 3 rounds that he will finish a man. And I had some mild interest in Cortes-Acosta coming off of the Contender Series. Heavyweight is so bad that just having one good skill and the willingness to leverage that one skill can get you surprisingly far, even at the UFC level at heavyweight. And I watched Cortes-Acosta on the Contender Series, and I'm like, well, he's huge, and he has a pretty good straight jab that he likes to throw. Considering the whole power dynamic at heavyweight, I always like to see a heavyweight who's like actually willing to work a jab and use it to manage distance and maybe keep everybody else's, haymakers off him. But even though he beat Vanderaa, I wasn't terribly impressed. Like, Vanderaa was really hurting him with leg kicks, and Cortes-Acosta, like, his jab was there, but it wasn't sensational. It's not like he was like busting Vanderaa up with it. He won the fight, but it was one of the less impressive 30-27 performances I can remember. I mean, these guys are both just kind of bottom of the UFC barrel, and everything that Vanderaa did to Cortes-Acosta is stuff that Chase Sherman is perfectly capable of doing, and in some cases can probably do better. Cortes-Acosta, like, he's another guy that, like Sherman, doesn't have much one-shot power by heavyweight standards. Between all that and Acosta coming back 3 weeks after, a fight that probably took a little bit out of him, I'm about to pick Chase Sherman in a UFC fight. Give me the underdog, Chase Sherman, to win a decision here. If Cortes-Acosta wants to engage in kind of a low-power outside boxing match, that is Chase Sherman's preferred way of fighting, and I think he'll win that. And he'll probably throw enough leg kicks to bother Cortes-Acosta. I mean, I'm sure that once this fight was announced, he and Alan Belcher and Brandon Davis sat down and watched the Cortes-Acosta Vanderaa fight. We're like, well, we're going to kick this man's legs.
Yeah.
If he does that for 2 rounds, the third, he might get saucy and take a man down. I could see him doing that. Give me Chase Sherman to win this one by decision. And hey, I can't believe I just picked Chase Sherman to win, but I think he's going to win this fight, and I think he's going to make it look pretty straightforward. Yeah,
what'd you say the odds were again?
Cortes-Acosta minus 190, Sherman plus 160.
Yeah, okay. So, I thought it was going to be bigger than that. He didn't look good, I thought he looked great on I shouldn't say great, but he looked better on the Contender Series than he looked on in his debut. Now, Sherman, we just previewed Sherman versus Josh Parisian. I'm going to say everything that I said last time because he didn't fight. So it looks like he'd be a good athlete in the division, but he really isn't. He's a boxer. He uses feints well, but he does He does overextend on his shot sometimes. His left hook is his best strike. I like that he looks for elbows inside. He busted up Ike Villanueva with elbows inside. As you mentioned, he's a high volume guy. He gets better as the fight goes along, but he lacks power. He's a point fighter, which is weird for the heavyweight division. Good calf kicks. He stays right in front of his opponent, which is not good. He's doesn't move at all. He doesn't have much of a ground game. When he's been taken down a bunch of times, he struggles to get back up, and he's been subbed a bunch of times. Now, the one thing about Acosta's a huge dude. He's a boxer. Good. Well, I like he has good volume. You mentioned his jab. His stiff jab. I think it was a little better than you were giving it credit for. He does throw straight shots down the pipe.
I said it's his best tool. I mean, like,
well, yeah, but you said well, I think you said something like, yeah, it's his best tool, but it was nothing special or something like that. Yeah.
It didn't look as good against Vandera as it did on the Contender Series.
Contender Series. Contender Series. He looked like a really good boxer that was coming in. Yeah. So I think we're in agreement with that. I'm gonna give it like somewhere between what we saw in his debut and what was on the Contender Series. So I'll put like middle of the pack. Like he looks really good with it.
Yeah.
He throws straight punches down the pipe. And then he what he does is he like throws a jab, follows with a straight shot, and then he tries to get in that distance. Then he starts swinging those big, huge power shots, whips the overhand. He does well to like wrap it around his opponent's defense. He also sits on his punches, so he generates some pretty good power, but he keeps his chin high in the air. And then, as you mentioned, the big thing about him is those calf kicks. I mean, you mentioned it. Like he almost lost that fight with just one simple thing. And we still have major question marks about his ground game. Dude, I was so close. I was so close to taking Sherman. I really do. One thing I do like about Acosta, even for a guy who's big, I like his volume. I mean, his volume in the Vandera fight was really high for a heavyweight. He does have the power advantage. There is an avenue for victory for Sherman, and I think they're going to go that avenue. I just think I'm going to say Acosta catches him with something big. So give me Acosta. I'll say he wins by first round knockout.
All right. Yet another bit of dissension on this card, and another
that was close, man.
Fairly tricky fight to pick.
I was close.
With that, we come to the co-main event and the first in the Texas versus Moldova doubleheader that tops the card of UFC Vegas 65. It is a light heavyweight matchup between Kennedy Zechikwu and Iwan Kudalaba. Zechikwu, the 30-year-old Nigerian by way of Dallas-Fort Worth, is 10-3 overall. He is 4-3 since joining the UFC out of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series. He did win his last time out. He knocked out Carl Roberson in the third round. That allowed him to snap the first losing streak of his career, as he had dropped back-to-back fights to Da Un Jung and Nikolai Negamariano. He will look to make it 2 in a row against Kudalaba. The 28-year-old Moldovan is 16-8-1 with 1 no contest overall. He is 5-7-1 in the UFC. He is on a 2-fight losing streak, and both of them are first-round finishes. He was guillotined by Ryan Spann back in May at UFC on ESPN, Blachowicz versus Rakic. Came back on September 10th at UFC 279 and got choked out in the first round by Johnny Walker. So, after back-to-back first-round losses to 2 of the biggest light heavyweights in the division, he gets the other biggest light heavyweight in the division. Kudalaba, the UFC just really likes like photo ops of him looking up at somebody, I guess. And Zechikwu is the moderate favorite here. He's -170. Kudalaba +145. Keith, I mean, you said between segments here, you just kind of groaned and said, I'm tired of talking about Iwan Kudalaba fights. And you know what? I'm going to toss this to you first, but if you're anything like me, it's because even though the guy is still only 28 years old, he just has the feeling of a fighter that's not going to change. Yeah. Like he is effectively the same fighter he was when he got to the UFC like 4 or 5 years ago. He'll rack up some surprising wins because of his incredible athleticism. Yeah. And he'll always lose some fights in weird, dumb ways because of some of the most legendarily bad fight IQ.
Yeah, let's get on to the main event. Yeah, so I'll say this. Yeah, he does enough that you see the skills in him. It's there. And you pick against him, and then he like wins a fight and you stop believing in him, and then he takes like 2 steps back again. 3 steps back. And then just when you're about to give up on him, he wins again and pulls you back in. And just like this ongoing thing with him. It was crazy. I'm not sick of watching him fight because he's exciting. It's fun. It's going to matter what's going to happen. It's going to be chaos. But like he's in the co-main event. Like when are we going to move on from this guy being like getting this attention? Like there's guys deserve a higher place on this card than he does. But I'm assuming you want me to get into the fight.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so this week was crazy for me. I definitely didn't get to do as much tape study as I normally like to do, and because of that, I had to kind of pick guys who not to do tape study on. Kudalaba was one of them. At this point, I kind of feel like I know what I got with him. Derrick Lewis was another one. I kind of know what I know what we got with Derrick Lewis. Kudalaba, he's your wrestler boxer. He's short. He throws hard shots. He can often overthrow his shots. He likes to load up with his left hook, which is like his big kill switch. But he telegraphs everything as he unloads. We've seen in the past he doesn't pace himself. He come out really aggressive. What I do like is he comes from a wrestling background, and he's been wrestling a lot more lately. I mean, we saw it. He took down Devin Clark, who's a good wrestler in his own right. He took down, I think, Devin Clark like 8 times. He took down Dustin Kobe, who's a really good fighter in the division, took him down 9 times. Johnny Walker he took down. But he made a position. He made a mistake in the last night. He rushed a position, rushed to advance on the ground. He really had that fight won if he just controlled himself. But he didn't. He was too aggressive. That's where Walker was able to sweep, get on top, and then he got submitted, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he got submitted. Yeah.
Yeah. He's been tapped out in the first round in his last 2 fights. Span and Walker.
2 fights. Okay. Yeah. He can get in grind in the clinch a little bit because he's super strong, but we've seen him gas out, in the past. So that's concerning. Kenny and Njoku, it's crazy how big this dude is. He can work like an outside game, long jab from the outside, but really he prefers to be in the pocket. He used pressure really good to get Kyle Robinson in the back up in the last fight, which is good, but he doesn't have power for like a guy that's huge. He's not going to really crack you. He also doesn't tuck his chin. He's got some defensive pulls. He pulls his head straight back. He pillars. He hits a lot of big shots. Good kicking game though. Throws a lot of front kicks. I like his step in knees. And then when he gets in that mid area, especially the clinch, if he gets in the clinch, he's super strong. Lands knees easily because of how big he is. He likes to wrestle, but he isn't a strong wrestler. But when he's on top, I mean, you're talking about killer ground and pound. I mean, just look at the size of him. Look at his fight against Carl Robertson where he was dropping these mean elbows on Robertson. Not a submission threat. He isn't a strong defense wrestler because based on his background, but he can get up. I mean, he's super big. He has like that Derrick Lewis just kind of post an arm, slowly work yourself way up, and just so big that it's hard to hold down. He has pretty good cardio. But I'm a little worried about his chin. He's been cracked a couple of times. I think about like the Dong Chung fight. Checked him. He checked his chin, so that's a little concerning. Prediction: after just shitting on the guy, I'm gonna take Kudalaba. I like his wrestling. I like that he's been wrestling a lot. I like that he has understood that that's having to go. It's going to be hard to hold Njoku down, but I think he's going to get some takedowns. I think it's going to be really close. I think he's might maybe have to endure a scare from Kenny. And you know what? Fuck it. No, I'm not. I'm switching my pick right on the fly. Yeah, what am I doing? Like Kudalaba was going to take him down. He's going to be winning, and then he's going to screw something up. He's going to end up underneath Kenny and Njoku, and Njoku is going to blast his face off with ground and pound, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to be those ones where you look at it and you're like, Kudalaba is a better fighter, but he didn't win because he made a mistake, and Njoku is going to beat him. So, yeah, I switched my pick on the fly. Give me Kennedy and Njoku by, I'll say, second round TKO. Third round. Make it third round.
I am in agreement with every element of that, and I thought we were going to differ here because I'm leaning Kennedy and Nchukwu. The problem with me with Cutelaba, and this is something I said about Trevin Giles. The last time we previewed one of his fights, he is one of the more skilled guys in the division. He has excellent physical gifts, but there's a moment in just about every one of his fights where he just makes a single bad mistake, defensive blunder, poor choice. And if his opponent is fresh enough and sharp enough and well coached enough to take advantage of that, Trevin Giles loses that fight, even if he was winning, even if he was the better fighter. That is Cutelaba times 10. And with Cutelaba, the wheels fall off so suddenly when they fall off. Like his best wins, like just steamrolling Khalil Roundtree, out wrestling Devin Clark. At his best, he can go right at top 15 fighters in the area of their strength and beat them badly. Like Clark's best element is probably his wrestling. Khalil's Roundtree, obviously his best element is his stand-up, like specifically his power. And Cutelaba can go right at those guys and finish them or outperform them. But then when he loses, it's fast and ugly. The Walker and Spann losses both. And in Walker and Spann, he's fighting two guys that are themselves like a little inconsistent and capable of poor performances from one fight to the next. But Cutelaba is more prone to poor performances, and in both cases made a specific strategic blunder that led to him getting finished in the first round. That's dangerous against Kennedy and Nchukwu. And the other thing that makes me less comfortable picking Cutelaba in this fight is that despite the fact that Nchukwu is gigantic and presumably has a substantial weight cut, I trust his third round cardio better than I do Cutelaba's, especially if Cutelaba has spent most of the fight wrestling. Cutelaba is a very good wrestler, but I've mentioned this difference a few times on our recent previews. There's the kind of wrestler who's very successful at wrestling, but he is getting tired faster than his opponent, especially if there are a lot of mat returns or it takes a lot of work to maintain control. And then they're the kind that they're taking the opponent down and the opponent is the one wearing out first. Cutelaba has a very physically exertion heavy style of wrestling. He's a very powerful wrestler. He picks people up and dumps them down. He gets emphatic mat returns when he has to, and it has not been great for his gas tank. So there's a possibility Cutelaba makes a bad mistake early and gets zapped, or just runs right into a guillotine by shooting on a much taller guy with super long arms, like he did to Ryan Spann.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. He could get guillotined quick.
Or there's the possibility that it's actually a back and forth wild fight where neither guy has really put a stamp on it, but in the third round, just Kennedy has more left in the tank and he's piecing up Cutelaba from distance, and Cutelaba's just kind of running at him, bent at the waist, looking for takedowns. So I'm taking Nchukwu here. If Cutelaba lamps him in the first round, that's my second most likely outcome. So it's not like I think Nchukwu is 10 times better. I trust him a little more, which is saying a lot because these are two of the more inconsistent fighters this talented in the UFC. Right. But give me Kennedy and Nchukwu by second round TKO, but almost no outcome here would surprise me. Cutelaba's been in a couple of the weirdest fights in recent memory. Obviously the first Ankalaev fight, the Paul Craig fight where, he got tapped out in the third round by Paul Craig and that's what happens. But the rest of the fight was this weird carnival of fouls and, That brings us to the main event of UFC Fight Night 215, a heavyweight matchup between Derrick Lewis and Sergey Spivak. Lewis, the 37-year-old Houstonian, is 26-10 with one no contest overall. He is 17-8 in the UFC, and while he has been a title challenger, longtime contender, and just generally a staple of the division, he has lost 3 of his last 4, and all of them have been by finish. He got TKO'd by Ciryl Gane in the third round in the headliner of UFC 265. Came back from that with a quick first-round knockout of Chris Daukaus, then got knocked out in the second round by Tai Tuivasa at UFC 271 this February. Came back and got knocked out in the first round by Sergey Pavlovich at UFC 277 in July. He'll look to get things back on track against Spivak. The 27-year-old Moldovan is 15-3 overall. He is 6-3 in the UFC. He is on a 2-fight win streak. A first-round TKO of Greg Hardy, followed by a second-round TKO of Augusto Sakai. That most recent fight took place at UFC on ESPN, Santos versus Hill in August. So Lewis looking to not make it 3 in a row. Spivak looking to make it 3 in a row. Spivak is a comfortable favorite. He is -195. Lewis +165 as the underdog. It's funny that, you mentioned that you kind of skipped the tape study on Lewis, and I completely understand why, because, Lewis is Derrick Lewis, and you and I have previewed, I think 4 or 5 of his fights. I didn't do any additional tape study, but I did revise my notes. Here's the thing. The book on Derrick Lewis, my usual spiel has been the same for the 2 years or something that we've been doing these shows. He's not a one-dimensional slugger. He has a surprising, unconventional get-up game. His offensive arsenal is more diverse than you think. His cardio is better than you think. And through it all, he has an incredible chin and is surprisingly defensively sound. You don't rack up 26 fights in the UFC heavyweight division if your chin is just on the gunnery range every single fight. I've had to revise those notes a little bit. Tai Tuivasa knocked him out cold. Like, that was a Derrick Lewis fight. He was toe-to-toe with another slugger. They were exchanging. They both got their licks in. Tuivasa was in trouble too, but Tuivasa was younger, fresher, and when he hit Lewis, this time Lewis went down, face planted. Surreal Gone pieced Lewis up with kicks, and just he dominated the distance. He controlled the rhythm of the fight. Lewis never really fully got untracked, and he just got out game plan, and he just got beaten by a better fighter. And then Pavlovich took all of 55 seconds, ran right through him. So Lewis, I mean, you can argue that the division has caught up with him and passed him to some extent. I mean, Gane, Tuivasa, and Pavlovich are all part of the youth movement in the heavyweight division. They're guys that, I mean, they weren't in the division. Well, I mean, Tuivasa might have been in the division 5 years ago, but he was not the guy he is now. He was a sideshow. He was what all the punchlines about Lewis were. He barely trains. He's just this kind of big sloppy dude. Like, these guys weren't in the UFC, or they weren't the fighters they are, just a couple of years ago. So it's possible that at 37, the chin is starting to go. The surprisingly adept reflexes in close quarters have slipped just that little bit. And this being a game of inches where all these guys have power, it's enough to knock Lewis out of the top 5 where he's been for a long, long time. I mean, that would make me sad to see, because Lewis is the type of fighter that if the chin and the reflexes are gone, he's going to end his UFC run on a string of ugly knockouts, because he doesn't know another way to fight, and he's not going to survive the firefights that he has for so long. Spivak is a developing striker, but he is neither Gane nor is he Tuivasa. Spivak has been steadily improving throughout his UFC run. Like, he's undergone a physical transformation, just as, I think he's gotten older. He's still only 27, but as he's gotten access to better training, I mean, hell, he probably wasn't even doing this full time when he got to the UFC. Like, he got to the UFC off of wins over like Tony Lopez and Travis Fulton, and he was just kind of like this. He was like this, pudgy 23-year-old kid from Moldova. Now he's like 10 pounds heavier and has dropped 10 pounds of fat. He's becoming a better striker, still kind of a grinder to me. Like, just clinch mauling and ground mauling are still his thing. And you would think that would be a recipe for, okay, this might be the highest ranked guy that Lewis has this good a shot of beating. I am picking Lewis here, and it's not like a homer pick.
Yeah.
But it is kind of a homer pick, because the one thing I will say is, for a fighter who is as associated with his hometown as Derrick Lewis is, and Derrick Lewis is one of the more popular fighters in the UFC, but he is as popular in Texas as any fighter in the UFC. Like, he might as well be Conor McGregor in Ireland for how popular he is.
All right, slow it down a little bit. You can go with the number 2-1 if you want. Not Conor. You can go to the number 2-1 if you want. Like the Molly
he's
McCann.
like the Diaz brothers in
Okay,
in the Bay Area or
Fair
North, like to the point where he like breaks through into regular media and like regular like grocery stores and restaurants are doing promotions, about the Yeah, dude. The Popeye's chicken, like Popeye's chicken, 10 miles from me, gave out free chicken if he beat. I mean, they weren't risking much because it was if he beat Daniel Cormier for the interim title. But
I want Derrick Lewis wearing like a Buc-ee's shirt. Like you walk around like Buc-ee's and there's pictures of Derrick Lewis.
I guarantee you he has a Buc-ee's shirt.
Everyone in Texas has a Buc-ee's shirt.
But dude, for a guy that is such a hometown hero, he fights so badly in Texas compared to how he fights in the Apex. Like he's undefeated in the Apex, and he's lost his the 3 fights he's lost in his last 4. They've all been in Texas. I'm not saying that it's completely attributable to that, but it is in some ways. When he's at home, surrounded by his entourage, not just Bob Perez and the few people that travel with him. Tuivasa might have beaten him anyway. But that was Lewis trying to get a knockout for the hometown fans.
Sure.
He just does better at the Apex. Like if he fights a sensible fight, I think again, unless he really has faded, this is kind of tailor-made for Lewis because he'll get the better of things on the feet against Spivak. Spivak doesn't have Tuivasa one-shot power, not even close. He doesn't have Surreal Gun footwork and hand speed. If Spivak takes him down, Lewis's goofy, I'm going to bench press you and then stand up, get up game still seems to work on most UFC heavyweights. There's not a whole lot of confidence here. At 37, I am resigning myself to the idea that Lewis's run as a top 5 heavyweight is probably over. If he loses here, his run as a top 10 heavyweight is over, and I don't envision any of it getting better. Like, he's aging, a new generation is coming up. Spivak is part of that generation, but stylistically, this should still be right in Derrick Lewis's wheelhouse. Give me Lewis by 3rd round KO here, probably having lost one or both of the first 2 rounds, probably having gotten taken down and had to, take his time getting back up. But yeah, not super confident in it. And if Spivak runs through him, then I've learned something this weekend. But give me one last great hurrah for Derrick Lewis in the empty and relatively quiet UFC Apex that has become his second home.
Yeah. So just to give some clarity, because I know people like to follow our picks and bet, and again, I always like to tell people like we're not a betting show. Don't. Yeah. I mean, we give you some advice. I don't like tell people to bet. I just don't like it. Yeah. I'm just worried about your money, I guess. Yeah. But we try to give some information what we see. Sometimes we have really, really good nights. Sometimes we have really bad nights. And one thing I do say that we don't do is we don't brag if we have good nights. We don't. At least I don't think we do. We might tease each other a little bit, but we're not trying to be like, oh, it's easy money, like always. Let's just like this.
Yeah, no. It is not easy money. If it was, we would bet.
We would be a betting show. Yeah. If you want betting advice, Jay Petrie writes a wonderful article on the website. Sean Sheehan does his top 5 picks, top 5 bets, excuse me. Yeah. Those are good shows. There's other betting things. But what I just want to give us a little background. So I didn't do any tape study, but what I do, and I do this every single fight card, I have my notes on each fighter that's fighting, and I will put I always do it like in italics, so I know that was for the last fight. Just things I noticed in their fight. So in case I get to where I can't do tape study, at least I added my notes. I updated my notes since whatever happens in this fight, there'll be updated notes on Derrick Lewis. So it should be a little different than last time, but I just want to put that out there. And then what happens when I get to the week, I try to rewatch fights on them. Mm-hmm. Derrick Lewis, he's gigantic. He's a gigantic human being. He moves. You mentioned it. He moves really well for a heavyweight. I always say that he has a really good high kick. I'm waiting for him to land a beautiful Mirko Krokop, put someone out with it. I love his flying knees. As I mentioned, even if you block one of his knees, it looks good. Just moves you across the cage. He's a very wait, and then explode kind of guy. He's historically the hardest hitter in the UFC history, the most knockouts. I've said this over and over and over again. He does not get enough credit for his accuracy. A lot of people just think of, oh, the big guy, that's why he knocks people out. Yeah, it's also where he plays it, like catching Curtis Blades coming in and different things.
The Volkov knock. If you watch the Volkov knockout in slow motion, it's like pinpoint.
Yeah, and the thing about him and Francis Ngannou and the biggest guys is, the guys historically for the knockout power, even like Chuck Liddell, they don't have to land clean. They just have to land in a certain zone, and they're putting you out. And that's what he does so well. He doesn't get enough credit for his gas tank. We've talked about this, because he doesn't carry about it. He looks like he's tired. He looks like, even when he's fighting, he looks like he's always in pain. You know what I mean? Like, he just looks like his knees are hurting him, his back's hurting him.
It's kind of like, just hands are down a little bit and has his pain look on his face. Yep.
But when have we seen him tired? Like obviously he's tired. He's a heavyweight, but I mean, it was like, oh man, that fight was going really good until Derrick Lewis gassed out. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Nope.
And I mean, and don't believe me, look at the numbers. How many late stoppages the guy has?
He is again. He's the UFC's all-time leader in knockouts now, but long before that, he was the UFC's all-time leader in knockouts in round 3 or later.
Yeah, other than having historically good power, take that out, he's everything. He's the complete opposite of what people view him as.
Yeah,
they look at him as a lumbering guy. No, he's extremely athletic. They look at him as a guy who was going to gas out because of that power. If you avoid his power, you gas out. No, he wins late fights. He is a bad wrestler, but as you mentioned, he's one of the hardest guys to hold down. Yeah, you have to be Daniel Cormier to hold him down. If you're not, he gets up. He waits. He gets a little bit of an opening, and then he gets back up to his feet. If he's on top of you, I say, anytime someone commits a terrible crime, something get rid of the death sentence. Just put Derrick Lewis on top of you, dropping ground and pound. It must be the scariest thing ever. But the thing about him, it's always been that rock chin. Can't crack him. Don't stand in the pocket because you're not going to hurt him, and he's going to hurt you. That's not the case. You mentioned Tai Tuivasa. Who was the other guy who just hurt him?
Pavlovich.
Yeah, Sergey Pavlovich. It's been back-to-back fights where he's been hurt bad. So I'm a little worried about his chin, and I'm also worried about how he responds to it. Is he going to be gun-shy? Will he be scared to let his hands go? But I think Sergey Spivak is at least the guy that's not going to scare him in that route. Now, Sergey might scare him on the ground, but I don't know if Derrick Lewis is going to be scared to, throw down with Sergey Spivak. Now, Spivak, he's flat-footed. He's a weak athlete, if we're being honest. He's not a good athlete on the feet. You mentioned that he's coming along as a striker. At one point, he was so one-dimensional. But he's a serviceable boxer. Throws a jab. He beat up Carlos Felipe with his jab. He follows a basic 1-2, basic kicking game. Has some holes defensively, pillars, which I don't like. Doesn't really move his head. But he's a good wrestler, and he's very unique style of wrestling. He's not blast through you. He getting close, grab the clinch, look for foot sweeps. He throws a lateral drop, which if he does that to Derrick Lewis, God bless him. I hope he does. I hope he does because it'd be so much fun. And I don't root. I was talking about a guy the other day. I don't even root. I don't even root for my picks. I don't really care if I'm right or wrong. I know I root for the recap show. What's the most exciting thing to talk about in the recap show? That's what I root for. Yeah. Lateral dropping Derrick Lewis, that'd be pretty fun to talk about.
It would be a great structural test of the octagon floor too. That shit would be loud as hell in the Apex.
Yeah, no shit. Be what was it you see though? You see regional. I don't think what do you call them? Wrestling shows, but they're not WWF The ones in like the American,
like the indie stuff. Like
yeah, okay, indie. That's what I was looking
Yeah.
for. Indie, like indie scene. Like they're at like American Legions and shit, and like the big fat guy gets body slammed and the freaking whole the cheap ass ring collapse. Like I just want to see I just want to see Sergey Spivak like either lateral drop or even more impressive. Grab, and he likes headlocks. That's what I'm saying. Get a headlock where he does a full 5 points, like legs are flying over the head, move, both of them going in the air. And this lands in the octagon, the whole octagon just falls apart, just explodes.
It's like the walls fall outwards.
Just goes out.
The middle of the floor just dents in. And...
Yeah, like with like you see kids playing with their brothers, and they like fighting on. They go like smash on the coffee table, the whole coffee table explodes and shit, or a table or sofa.
That's the answer to the question. How could you have a UFC main event that ends in a no contest and it's actually a great thing?
That would
like
be
that's it right there.
No, I'm sorry, dude. I know it technically is a no context, dude. If you hit a 5-point move on a heavyweight and the whole octagon explodes, that's a win. I'm sorry, Sergey Spivak wins.
Right.
Like,
I'll allow it.
You go back, like you pull out the rule book, like the rule that no one ever knows, and it's section 42F says if Sergey Spivak hits a headlock at Derrick Lewis and the octagon explodes, Sergey Spivak wins.
Well, and the UFC would have to redesign the octagon. It would be kind of like after Shaq's first year in the NBA, they put breakaway rims because he broke like 10 backboards. It would be like that. It's like, okay, now we have the post Spivak octagon that's like reinforced differently.
It's funny that you mentioned Shaq because Lewis is like a Shaq. Well, one, they both have like those like funny like talking personalities. They have like that deep voice, but they're like funny what they say. And obviously, they're two huge human beings. But even like how Shaq was viewed in the NBA, and guys, I'm not like it's not an NBA podcast, so don't at me if I'm saying something stupid. But like Shaq never got a credit for his athleticism, his like ability to run the court, and I'm not talking about the fat days of the Celtics.
No, but the young
Lakers,
Shaq,
Lakers, the Magic, like his prime, the Heat. Heat. But like he didn't get credit for his technical skills. I feel like Derrick Lewis is like the same way. He's just like just look at a guy and just stereotype like what he should be. Even though I'm supposed to be talking about Sergey Spivak, even though he goes for these techniques, I'm always like, oh God, it's not going to work one time because he's willing to give up his back to get a takedown. Like I think of, and this is going way back in the time machine, but remember when Remco Pardue was fighting?
Oh yeah.
And he'd get to the clinch and he'd do that like judo throw where they like just sweep out the arm where they actually give the guy his back, but they're holding the arm. Like he did against Orlando Wheat in UFC 2. And he's got his arm across. But like nowadays, guys would like throw a hook in and like slowly take their back. Like Spivak does that with like the headlock and the scarf and all that, where they kind of giving up their back and they're putting themselves in a dangerous position, kind of like we just saw Carlos Esparza doing like a Peterson, which she's got her arms behind, where she's kind of having her back to her opponent. I think it's not going to work for him one time. But the other thing about the lateral drop against Derrick Lewis, like if he goes for that, you better go. You better make it all the way through because if Derrick Lewis falls on top of you. Good luck.
The fight's over.
It's over. Besides being on top, he's his ground pound is legendary.
Yeah.
He's much safer route, and I expect this. He can shoot. He will shoot on the hips, and he also likes snatch singles, getting close and just snatch a single, run the pipe, or just turn the corner with it. That's the best bout. You don't want Derrick Lewis on top of you. His ground and pound has come a long way, and he really is a submission threat. So there's a really good chance. And here's my prediction. There's a really good chance Sergey Spivak takes down Derrick Lewis and just submits him quick. Like I could see that happen. Even though I'm saying how tough it is to hold Derrick Lewis down, how hard it is to submit him. He's up there in age. You wonder about his motivation. It wouldn't shock me if he's taken down and submitted. And I expect him to take down Derrick Lewis 2 or 3 times. But I think I'm not ready to write off Derrick Lewis completely. I think if the old Derrick Lewis is still there and he's not shot, and I know I do this sometimes. I'm like the anti-Belichick, where Bill Belichick would rather be a year early than a year late on a player. Like he lets the guy go, and the Patriots fans go crazy, and then it finds out like, oh, yeah, Bill Belichick was right, like over and over again. I know I can kind of hold. I mean, I picked Frank Yeager to win this weekend, so. I'm hoping I'm wrong. Oh, sure. I'm hoping I'm right. I'm hoping Derrick Lewis is still there. I'm hoping he finds a way back to his feet. And I think he does. And I think he has one last haymaking shot in him. And I think he's going to find it. And I say he doesn't. I think he's going to knock him out. I'm going to say Derrick Lewis, late first round knockout.
There you go. 2 picks for the upset in the main events, and for what we both seem to be admitting might be one of the last gasps for one of the more reliably enjoyable heavyweight contenders of the last decade in the UFC. But the way the future is coming.
We picked a lot of upsets on this card.
We did pick a lot of upsets in this card.
It might be hard talking on the recap show. But I was 4-9. All right.
Yeah, might be a real short recap show. Yeah, not a whole lot to say. Anything interesting happen? All right.
Yeah, please tune in on Wednesday, or please tune in on Monday when the preview for the next card out. See if we can do better than 4-9.
All right, that is it. The Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 215, Lewis versus Spivak. I have been your host, Ben Duffy. He has been your analyst in residence, Keith Shillan. If this is your first time watching one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you enjoyed it. We do our best to provide a mix of serious analysis and prediction with a few side voyages and plenty of old school references. Please do like, subscribe, leave us a comment in the comment section if you're watching this on YouTube. Keith and I are both good about responding to those. We love to hear your takes on these fights. If you've gotten the upset picks that we missed, if you think we're out of our heads on some of these, both could be quite correct. So, get at us and we'll get right back at you. But most importantly, join us on the recap. We are live on the Sherdog YouTube page about 15 minutes after the main event, where we will talk about this entire card in reverse order. Keith takes the captain's chair. We'll start talking about the main event, work our way all the way down to that women's flyweight curtain jerker. We'll talk about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There is pretty much always something. And the live chat is open during that entire time. So we're taking your questions and comments in real time. We would love to have your input. We have a real fun community there that kind of hangs out after the fights and talks about them. So please do join us. Between now and then, thank you once again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your week. And by all means, enjoy the fights.